morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Catch the NFL podcast, where we give you up-to-date NFL news, NFL debate, and most importantly, fantasy football predictions. We have got myself, John, very excited to be here, and of course, Steven on the other end, who I'm assuming is also very excited to
Very
be
excited
here.
about this week's podcast.
Lots to get into this week. Lots of actual NFL news, it seems like, for what's been planned for a couple weeks or so. So we're definitely excited to hop into this one. We have got the AFC North tonight, a loaded division, plenty to get into. So we may as well just jump right into things. So to open up this week, we thought it'd be a interesting kind of way to kick it off. Just kind of evaluating free agents around the league. So we just wanted to both pick an offensive as well as a defensive player who is still a free agent in the NFL, and kind of speculate where said player might land. So I'll go ahead and kick off that segment tonight. For my offensive player, I went with the running back who is currently a St. Louis and LA Ram, and for 1 year an Atlanta Falcon, none other than Todd Gurley himself. And I do think that Todd Gurley still has something left in the tank. I think he proved that last year, especially in the red zone, 9 touchdowns last year. And I understand that there's definitely injury concern there. Definitely no doubt about that.
You can repeat that. That's for sure. He's dusted.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, hey, I think that he'd be a great number 2 back, at least. I think he's a veteran player. He's got experience at the playoff team, experience in the Super Bowl. So I think he's definitely a viable player and a viable option. We definitely have not seen him return to form of what he did in 2017 and 2018, double-digit touchdowns, over 1,200 rushing yards each year. And that's not even including over 500 receiving yards, and absolute monster, and it's really unfortunate. This is definitely a circumstance where an injury has certainly plagued a player. I have a very boring prediction where I'd like to see Todd Gurley go, and that would be actually back to the Rams with some of our other breaking news this week is the Rams have lost.
Cam Akers going down with that Achilles, which is just brutal. That wrecked my fantasy. I mean, the whole fantasy community is definitely up in arms about that injury. Definitely devastating to both the fantasy community and also his career going forward. That's a hard injury to come back from.
Yeah, huge impacts fantasy-wise. Definitely something that we're planning on getting into as well. But I don't know what you think about that. I do, obviously there's speculatively some bad blood there between the Rams and Todd Gurley and his departure, but doesn't it just seem like the safest fit for him? I don't know if you have any any teams that you think he might end up with, but
yeah, no, I mean, if you look at Todd Gurley's stats last year, again, close to 700 yards rushing, 9 touchdowns. You saw him as a great player that just kind of fit his role in Atlanta. At the end of the day, I do think that's a great fit coming back to LA with Sean McVay. Do I personally see that happening? No, I don't. I don't think that the chemistry is going to be there. And I think that there was a relationship that was not on amicable terms when he did leave, because that was at a point in time, I think, where Todd Gurley was a little bit hesitant to admit how serious that injury was. And Sean McVay, along with the rest of the ownership with that organization, just decided to move on from the guy. And like you said, I mean, this is a case of a player whose career was so impacted by an injury. I mean, you look at this guy's first 5 years in the NFL, I don't think I've ever seen another player on a Hall of Fame trajectory quite like him. he could have been the next Eric Dickerson, one of the best running backs ever. Todd Gurley could have been. So it's really unfortunate. Um, so you said the Rams. I think that's a good spot in terms of a scheme fit. I mean, that offense is loaded. Another team, I mean, you can go with the Ravens. I know there was a little bit of rumors circling around about them being linked together potentially. I think putting Todd Gurley into a situation where he's more of a committee back is going to let him thrive. And I also think that he adds a little bit of flair to that running back core in terms of he's been there, he's done that, he's got the leadership, he's been to a Super Bowl. And it could be a good thing in the locker room, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to see him on a Super Bowl contending team like the Baltimore Ravens. And why not add it to that offense with what they do running the football? I mean, I think, I'd love to see Todd Gurley go anywhere. I do think, even with the injury concerns, it's a little surprising that he still hasn't been signed. And I do think, unfortunately, as more injuries start to occur this offseason, the closer we move to week 1 of the NFL regular season, I certainly think Todd Gurley will be on a football team. I don't think that he goes unsigned. And even if he does before week 1, by midseason, there's no way that Todd Gurley's not on a team, at least as a number 2 back or as a veteran presence to a team that is dealing with an injury. So I definitely think he will be on a football team, and I'm looking forward to it. I really do like Todd Gurley as a player.
Yeah, same. And another guy on the offensive side that's still at free agency, same position is the guy I picked, and that's Adrian Peterson. In my opinion, a lot less of an attractive pick in terms of putting that on your team. I mean, this is a guy who is even farther away from his peak performances back in like 2013 to 2015. But you see him over the past couple of years with Washington and Detroit. He's a very serviceable back. He's come in there, played that workload type of or workhorse type of role. I mean, in Washington, his first year there in 2018, he had 250 attempts. He's been 5 to 7 touchdowns every year the past 3 years. And really, so since I've seen him, it doesn't really look like he's as aged as even Todd Gurley, even though there's a well of age difference. I mean, Todd Gurley is only 26. I think AP is like 32 years old. So, I mean, I think AP's got a lot left in the tank. And the team that I picked for him is Todd Gurley's old team, and that's the Falcons. There has been some rumors circulating, a lot of speculation that AP would go there. Another reason why I think that is a good fit is because you see the coach there, Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith is a guy who liked to give the ball to a bell cow back like Derrick Henry. I think AP comes in and he is used to that kind of role, and him and Mike Davis can really kind of split that touches, because I don't think Mike Davis is going to be able to do it for the full year.
Yeah, I think that would be a great number 2 back to Mike Davis. Very similar running style between the two. Yeah, I think they complement each other great. And Adrian Peterson, obviously a Hall of Famer, and but really when you look at his stats outside of any injury-plagued years, and that his first year outside of Minnesota, where he was kind of bounced between Arizona and New Orleans, he's rushed for over 600 yards every season he's been in the NFL. And with 604 yards last year being his worst rushing year, mainly due to age and
it being Detroit.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And then even the 2 years before that, when he was with the Washington football team, there were several other running backs in that backfield as well. But I think he made a great point. Over the 3 years he's had over the last 3 years, he's had at least 5 touchdowns, with 2 of those years being 7 touchdowns. Definitely still a veteran. He can come in and be a serviceable back. And yeah, I love the fit with the Atlanta Falcons. I think that's a great fit for him as well.
I mean, last year there were a lot of times where I watched the Detroit games, unfortunately, and I would be thinking to myself, Adrian Peterson is looking a lot better than DeAndre Swift. Definitely was looking better than Kerryon Johnson because he ended up getting cut. But I think that just it's less to speak badly of DeAndre Swift or anybody else there, but has more to speak of like how much left AP really does have in his tank.
Yeah, yeah, and it'd be even interesting to see him to go into another team with a rookie running back like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who we will talk about tonight.
Mhm.
Just see him kind of be that veteran presence who kind of helps lead a younger backfield, but can still come in and play the game of football as good as anyone else at the position. Speaking of position, let's go ahead and switch to the defensive side of the football. So, my free agent for the night will be KJ Wright, a very, very good, kind of underrated linebacker, in my opinion. Just under 600 solo tackles in his career. A little over, just over 13 sacks in his career. Definitely been a big part of Seattle's success this past decade. Definitely someone who's really played well alongside Bobby Wagner and under Pete Carroll, under the Legion of Boom in earlier years. So I like KJ Wright, a quiet veteran, just all around good football player.
Mhm.
Plays a right outside linebacker position, of course, but and I'm going to be boring once again, but I think he's best fitted just going back and re-signing with Seattle, and I think that there have been some rumors already of that happening. But I did want to ask you, kind of put you on the spot, and see if you think if there's any teams out there who really need this position filled that he would be a good fit to.
Yeah, I mean, I think a team. I certainly don't know if they'd have the cap to do this. They're so stretched at cap, but a team that comes to mind that is in need of linebacker is the Saints.
Yeah.
They tried to kind of beef it up during the draft. We talked about it last week, and it didn't really seem like something that was really going to become or come to fruition that first season. And they've got some older guys. They got Davis at linebacker, but I think KJ Wright comes in, adds a lot of flexibility at that position too. It can play both that 3-4 and 4-3 lineup. And if you look at his stats, I mean, he's a guy who can play the pass pretty well. I mean, very active in pass deflections, had 4 picks back in 2015, 3 back in 2014. I mean, this is a guy who knows how to get his hands on the ball. And another thing too, it can't be said enough, a guy that comes from a winning organization and a team as legendary as the Legion of Boom was back in the day, that stays with you the rest of your career, and you can bring a lot of value.
Yeah, and as good as the Legion of Boom was as a unit, a lot of people tend to forget just how good the front seven was under those same years as well. I mean, obviously not as legit, as the Legion of Boom, but their linebacking core was as good as any in the NFL
Oh,
during those years
absolutely.
as well. So, yeah, big KJ Wright fan. I hope to see him. I I have a strong feeling he'll be back with Seattle, but I also like to see him with a Super Bowl contending playoff team as well. Not to say that Seattle is not one, but I like you kind of touched on. I think with any of these 4 players that we're kind of looking at, at the end of the day, they're all going to be a great veteran presence who can help push a team towards championship level. And yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and hand it to your defensive player as well.
Yeah, my defensive player, ex-Colt, and it's going back to his old team. This is gonna be Justin Houston, very seasoned veteran, 31 years old, defensive end, can play both the interior when he needs to, but mostly on that outside at that 4-3 base type of setup here. I think that this guy has a ton left in the tank in terms of rushing the passer. One thing that we saw with that Tampa Bay run was they loaded up on the D line. They got a bunch of guys that can come in and out and rush that quarterback, which is what the Colts kept him for so long. I mean,
Sure.
you look at his stats. He joined the Colts in 2019, 11 sacks, and then in 2020 he had 8 sacks. Back in 2018, his last season with Kansas City, he had 9 sacks. I mean, this is a consistent guy. I mean, shoot, look at his number back in 2014.
Yeah, 22 sacks.
22 sacks. Yeah. This guy is a beast at rushing the passer. And my thought is I think he should go back to Kansas City where he started his career. A lot of chemistry there. There are some rumors circulating about that coming back together. he still hasn't landed a team. I know the Colts are still kind of in the market on him. He's going to end up probably not taking a deal as high of a value as he's probably worth, just because of the certain situation with free agency this year, with the COVID impacts. But at the end of the day, this is a guy who should be on a team. And you join a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, ranked 22 in PFF rankings. I think he comes in, he brings a great element, can retire maybe in the next year or two at the team he started with. And, another big thing to touch on here is the Frank Clark situation. They gave him the bag a couple of years ago, has not showed up to that value. But also now he's facing charges and probably won't play the season.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think Justin Houston, I didn't realize we were going to be so boring with the segment, sending everyone back to either a former team or the team that played with the previous year. But I actually think, once again, that's a perfect fit for Justin Houston. And, it hopefully gives him the opportunity to win a Super Bowl as well. He hasn't been part of any of those Chiefs teams that have made it to, the AFC Championship or to the Super Bowl. So I think that'd be great for him as well as a player. So I really have always been a big fan of Justin Houston. And I think wherever he goes, he can certainly make not only an impact, but an immediate impact as well. So definitely looking forward to what he's going to do in the league in the future as well. And I think he definitely has a lot left in the tank. Definitely 1 or 2 solid years of still productive numbers, and definitely going to be a great veteran presence. So,
we talked about Seattle. Here's another guy from the NFC West that we talked about earlier in the segment too, Cam Akers. Probably the biggest breaking news we've had over the past couple weeks, to be honest. This is a guy that was definitely an RB1 in a lot of fantasy draft boards, was continuing to rise. And this was a guy in the playoffs last year that we saw came in and really was the only reason the Rams were in the mix. I mean, Jared Goff literally got cut because of how bad he was on the back half of the season. Cam Akers, great player, really unfortunate. You see a lot of guys at that running back position, if they get hurt early in their career, they're not going to still be at that team going forward. And unfortunately, the Rams have a huge history with this injury thing. I mean, Todd Gurley, like we just talked about, and now Cam Akers.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm a big Cam Akers fan. Was the fortunate soul who picked him up in our fantasy league last year on the waiver wire. And I wasn't where you kind of had to draft him this year. I wasn't someone I was necessarily targeting, but definitely someone who I thought was as good as any other running back in that kind of tier. And yeah, definitely extremely, extremely unfortunate. We hate to see this happen to any player, but it also has, huge fantasy impacts as well. And definitely probably the largest fantasy news that's come out quite some time. And definitely, as the offseason continues to progress, these are the kind of things that you just have to be aware of. So the obvious implication is, of course, a lot of those running backs in the same tier are going to be moving up a spot in terms of, where they're ranked as a running back in the fantasy football draft, but also where their average ADP is as well. But outside of that, of course, we've got the next man up on the Rams offense. And then you also have to speculate, is Darrell Henderson a lock for their RB1? Are they going to sign another player like Todd Gurley or Adrian Peterson? Are they going to Le'Veon Bell? Are they going to try and go out and trade for someone? And it just feels like Sean McVay is putting, all his tokens on the table, so to speak, right? That this offseason he went out, did some bold things, went all in on Matt Stafford, and it definitely seemed like Cam Akers was part of the big picture here. So I think if anything, it's a big blow to this Rams offense and this Rams team, and kind of the expectations that were starting to be set for them under a new quarterback, Matthew Stafford. So,
yeah, no, I totally agree. This is a massive blow. I mean, it's not just a fantasy impact here. I mean, Cam Akers was, I think, going to be a massive part. He had around like 200 touches last year. I think he was going to be high 200s, low 300s. And with that absence, there's a couple questions like you just brought up. Is Henderson going to be that RB1? And can he actually even be an RB1 for a full season? Wasn't able to do it last year. I mean, Henderson came in and he was supposed to kind of be the guy that they were going to try to groom to be that starter, and he just couldn't stay healthy.
Sure.
So he's got to do that first off. But secondly, what kind of impact does this have on Matt Stafford? He doesn't necessarily have that security blanket to be able to hand the ball off anymore to as a lead of a player, at least based off of historicals. But also, does maybe Sean McVay say, screw it, I want to pass it every play anyways. Why don't we just start throwing the ball more?
Yeah.
And Matt Stafford, keeps pumping it out.
Sure.
My thought is that they end up bringing somebody else in to help spell out Henderson. They continue to do the committee backfield like they did last year. It was successful. But I don't think Henderson's RB1. But at the same time, I do think he could easily be at that maybe 5th round running back that I would take.
Yeah, I don't see myself targeting Henderson in terms of fantasy. It may work out, and I do think that right now he's going to be drafted just based off of that he is theoretically the RB1. But in my opinion, it's unfortunate, very, very unfortunate, but it just kind of makes this Rams backfield for now one that I'm going to be staying away from. But, I'd love to see someone obviously prevail from this situation and be fantasy relevant, but also just be relevant for the Rams, because I'm excited to see this kind of new beginning for Matt Stafford with an organization other than the Detroit Lions. I've always liked Sean McVay as a coach as well. So I hope that this whole situation kind of gets worked out by week 1. And, aside from that, we definitely wish Cam Akers a speedy recovery, something that we absolutely hate to see. But yeah. And I think it'll work out for both sides. It's just, hey, it's part of the game, right? So.
Yeah, I think, it's unfortunate, but I do see the Rams rebounding on this, and I think Cam Akers, still going to be a great player.
Absolutely.
So, unfortunate though.
Oh. All right. So let us go ahead and hop into some NFL debate for the night. So we are going to be covering the AFC North this week. And the first team on the table, first of all, what an exciting division. When you think of football, the AFC North is a good representation of the National Football League. This is a great division. It's a kind of that tough-nosed, gritty, sock you in the mouth type of division, and definitely exciting. We got a lot to get into. So Baltimore Ravens, our first team on the table, my respective team, are one of my 2 respective teams for the night. So my trio I will be defending will be quarterback Lamar Jackson, running back J.K. Dobbins, and for my pass catcher, I'm going with tight end Mark Andrews. So Lamar Jackson right now, you're looking at in terms of fantasy, his ADP overall is number 49, QB number 4. He has the 28th most difficult strength of schedule for a quarterback this year. And last year, he averaged just under 28 points per game, which was the most in the National Football League, believe it or not. That was from a certain point in the season where he was averaging just under 28, which was the most in the league. It was not the entire season. But needless to say, for a quarterback, being compared to running backs and receivers as well, uh, it just kind of baffles me is I guess is the question, or this, the point I'm kind of getting to here is that Lamar Jackson is ranked QB4 on average, and I think you could make the argument that he is a QB1 in fantasy, that he is as good as any other quarterback in fantasy football. And I think we're both huge Lamar Jackson fans. I know you've had him on teams before in fantasy, and obviously he is the focal point outside of fantasy for this Baltimore Ravens team. And he really just so much talent. I mean, it doesn't really seem to matter, who is on this team if they can protect Lamar Jackson at all, and they can have Lamar lead this team. It feels like they are going to win at least 10 games in the regular season. The playoffs have been a little bit of a different story. But, the Baltimore Ravens, led by Lamar Jackson, are as good of a football team as anyone in the AFC, I would argue. I mean, they're electric. They're a tough football team. They're gonna run like crazy. They're gonna run in a way that other football teams aren't going to. Although, the debate last season was how predictable they started to become. But you also just can't. How do you game plan for this team, I guess, is my question. And even before even diving into the team, I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on Lamar Jackson going into this 2021 football season.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm definitely excited for Lamar Jackson. I think he definitely got a little bit too much heat last season. Certainly, he didn't start off super hot in the first half of the split of 2020. But I think he also had COVID at a point too. I mean, there was a lot of things going on last year, and I know coming into last offseason, a big thing that they were trying to focus on with his development was to kind of eliminate some of his improv throwing type of stuff and to make his throwing routine and his chemistry kind of more sticky, so that kind of every single play he's got a more fluid movement. And at the end of the day, they weren't able to do that because the COVID off season was so different. This season, I think they're going to really kind of hit back on that. I think the coach, offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, I think he's going to also realize, what, I could quite possibly get fired with a 10-game win season if our offense doesn't change and Lamar doesn't get better. So I do think the Ravens are going to put Lamar into a better position to succeed. And I mean, quite frankly, Lamar had a great season last year. We just are comparing it to one of the best seasons ever recorded in history. So I think what we're probably going to see is a kind of move to an average of between 2019 and 2020. And I think we're actually going to see an elevated floor for his passing, and his running is going to stay the same. So all things said, if he stays healthy, this is a guy that is an absolute killer in fantasy. I'm taking him over Josh Allen. You got Patrick Mahomes up there. You got Kyler Murray up there. Those are the two guys where maybe I'm not. But honestly, if you look at it as a strategy of, all right, so what's his ADP right now? 49. So get him maybe the fourth round, right? First 3 rounds, take 3 running backs, and then get Lamar Jackson. You basically got 5 of the most important positions, or 4 of the most important positions. You have 4 running backs. I mean, it's pretty solid.
Yeah, and to correct my stat, it was after week 11 of last year, so week 12 through the end of the season, he averaged just under 28 fantasy points, which was the most in the league. So very important time to have your quarterback having the most fantasy points per game towards the end of the season, including fantasy playoffs. So, and even, through the first 11 weeks of the season last year, he still averaged 20 points per game, which isn't the best from a quarterback, but still very, still very good. So, and yeah, I really do like this Ravens football team. When you start to look at kind of like what you were talking about just now, where you can kind of draft Lamar Jackson and the guys going around him, he definitely has big company around him. Very hard to argue against drafting anyone before Patrick Mahomes, just with his ceiling. And I see that you're making the argument against Josh Allen, but I think a lot would argue that looking at Josh Allen's stats from last year, even including his rushing stats, that he's more valuable than Kyler or Lamar.
Yeah,
I
no,
have
and
a go ahead. Yeah.
no, yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, my point on Josh Allen is I think there's going to be some considerable regression. I think his season was it's really it was an outstanding season.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
definitely could have been an MVP player.
Yeah.
But that's my only point on him, right? Like I'm not trying to take a player at their peak value because I don't see Josh Allen getting much better than what he did last year.
Sure. Yeah, I just have this feeling that Lamar Jackson this year is going to be a dangerous fantasy player, and definitely someone to have on your radar, and someone that you may be able to get, kind of when that quarterback run starts to happen after Patrick Mahomes is drafted in your league. Someone who you compare, with some earlier players, some running backs, some receivers, someone who can really take your team over the top. So lots of crazy stats fantasy wise from Lamar Jackson from over the 2 years. So I definitely encourage you to go check those out.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, all right. So who are the other quarterbacks in there, right? So it's Lamar, it's Josh Allen, it's Patrick Mahomes, and is it Kyler?
Yeah,
At that
those
top?
are.
Yeah, yeah. There's so let's really think about this here. Okay. Like I could easily see Patrick Mahomes actually falling out of the tier one. And this is for this reason. The Chiefs over the past couple of years have been trying to emphasize the run more. I do think it's a bounce back season for Clyde Edwards. And you also lose Sammy Watkins, who, yeah, okay, he's not a big player or anything, but outside of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, they have like very little actual weapons that are proven.
Sure.
So I think you, and yes, I get it. Patrick Mahomes, he's the GOAT. But at the end of the day, like I think they are going to change up their strategy a little bit more, and he might see a reduced stat line. Allen, Murray, they're going to be killers, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity here for Lamar Jackson to come in here and dub it as a fantasy perspective.
Absolutely.
Now, yeah, with that said, though, it's really like Lamar Jackson's career is turning into one of those careers where it's like regular season doesn't matter. You got to figure it out in the postseason. And I'm just not too sure yet if he's going to be able to duel it out for 4 straight games against the best in the league.
Yeah.
And so I don't see this team as a Super Bowl team right now.
Yeah.
And it could be a while. It could be a while until that happens.
Yeah, I think that's the big question mark with this team. I think we know what they can do in the regular season. They kind of feel like this is a make it or break it year, right? If they don't win this division, and obviously we'll get into some of the other teams in this division a little bit, but if they don't win this division, or at least, I mean, I feel like if they don't make it to the AFC Championship, there's going to be some large implications after this year on their coaching staff. Definitely feels like a make it or break it year, and you kind of wonder how long this scheme offensively can kind of keep doing what it's doing, and it does kind of, it's a good kind of pivot point here. We'll go ahead and start with the running backs. I like J.K. Dobbins a lot. I really do like him as a running back. Just over 800 rushing yards last year, 9 touchdowns. Not really a receiving back. Only 120 receiving yards off 18 receptions last year. But I think we definitely saw what you want to see in a rookie running back. And obviously he is competing for a lot of touches. Gus Edwards, he did have just over 720 rushing yards last year, 6 touchdowns, and just over 120 receiving yards as well. So you're splitting, definitely splitting time with Gus Edwards. And then you're obviously competing with Lamar Jackson as well. So I think with all that said, J.K. Dobbins had a great year last year. And if I'm not mistaken, he was injured at a point last year as well. So let's see, actually, I may have, I don't have that pulled up. But anyways, obviously there's a lot of competition for touches within this offense. And I think you definitely see everything you want to see out of a young J.K. Dobbins. Um, but with that being said, it does kind of interest me before we get into the tight ends and receivers that really didn't see this team make any big splashes in the offseason and free agency. And this feels like a team that needed a big splash in free agency. And I know they did make some attempts to bring in some receivers, but you just have to think they, they should have tried harder, right? I mean, like we just discussed, this seems to be a huge make it or break it year. Um, and with a quarterback like Lamar Jackson under center, why not just add as much firepower as he possibly can? Um, and, I like Marquise Brown as a receiver, but I don't like him as a number one receiver whatsoever. So I love the draft pick of Rashad Bateman. And I think this is someone who will hopefully come in and make an immediate impact. I think he certainly has the capability. And I do like that they brought in Sammy Watkins, but once again, I like Sammy Watkins as a player, but I like him as a third string receiver. I don't like him as a number one or a number two receiver. And I think if any team can piece it together, this receiving core can. You kind of hope that Bateman can step up and be that number one receiver, that Marquise Brown can kind of be the person who stretches the field for them. And they still have Sammy Watkins as a viable slot receiver or someone who can, from time to time stretch the field. But I just wish that, they had that one player that is going to do it all for them on the receiving end. And for my trio, I did pick Mark Andrews at the tight end position. And I think Mark Andrews is as good of a tight end as there is in the NFL. He's not at that that top tier level. He's not a Travis Kelce, a Darren Waller. Hasn't really had a breakout season like we've seen with George Kittle. But the most important thing I think for Mark Andrews as a player is that Lamar Jackson has shown time after time that he trusts Mark Andrews, and he trusts Mark Andrews in the red zone. So lots of fantasy implications there as well. I think Mark Andrews is a great fantasy tight end going at tight end number 4 this year. I agree with that ranking. On average, he's number 4. And I think he's a great fantasy tight end, and definitely in standard leagues too, getting a lot of red zone targets. But with all that being said, it just kind of feels like this is the team that they have moving forward. There's a lot of young players on this team. You got a young running back. You've still got Gus Edwards on this team. You've got a fourth tight end going into his 4th year. And then outside of Sammy Watkins, you've got a very young receiving core. So I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts and see if you think that this offensive, if this offense can come together and kind of turn into what everyone hopes they can turn into or not.
No.
No. Okay.
To okay. Answer it. So to start with J.K. Dobbins, he's being drafted way too high. This is a guy who has actual player. I do love him. I think he's gonna be great for the Ravens going forward, and I do think he's the best running back, top 2 running back that came out of that draft class. But you look at where he's going right before Clyde Edwards, Chris Carson, David Montgomery. I'm taking all 3 of those guys over J.K. Dobbins, and that's because he's got to compete at the red zone with Gus Edwards and Lamar Jackson. And hell, they also got Justice Hill, who has been a very explosive back for them. So I think when you're talking about touchdowns and how limited he is there, that's huge, because that's one of the main drivers of how you're going to have an RB1 or 2. But then you also got to look at the other part of it. It's receiving. You need a run, especially if you're playing half PPR, you need a running back who's going to be able to get some sort of volume there. And J.K. Dobbins is not going to get that. You already noted on it. He had a really bad season last year. I think he's very capable of doing it, and it would improve their team. But when Lamar has the opportunity to dump it off or run, he's running 10 out of 10 times. And not for a bad reason. It usually turns into a great play, but he's just not going to give that volume to J.K. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that opinion, but I don't see JK at the value he's at. If he fell back like right below those guys, I'm taking him because I'm taking him above DeAndre Swift and Miles Sanders. But that's kind of where I see him.
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, I definitely agree. I definitely draft Edwards-Helaire, definitely Montgomery as well in front of Dobbins. Chris Carson, I've kind of gone back and forth with. I like where he's available in a lot of NFL fantasy drafts, but I also had him on my team last year. And it's definitely, when he was playing, a great fantasy back, but also when he was not playing, a very disappointing fantasy back. So that's kind of more of a personal vendetta than anything, but I definitely see the value and agree with the value in Chris Carson. But I also agree with you that I would pick J.K. Dobbins over Miles Sanders as well as DeAndre Swift. But I think what kind of happens here is people see J.K. Dobbins, they think of the Baltimore Ravens offense, they think of all that firepower, and it's really stemming from Lamar Jackson, if anything. And it makes them a more attractive fantasy pick. But when you really break down the numbers, which I kind of briefly touched on, Gus Edwards, when you look at his stats compared to J.K. Dobbins' stats last year, they're not that different.
No, and the Ravens love Gus Edwards. They love
absolutely.
Him. I think he's a sneaky pick, to be honest, because they trust him in any situation.
Yeah, and God forbid anything happens to J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards is the number one back, right away. So he's a great handcuff player, someone you can get pretty late in fantasy drafts, and I do like the value in Gus Edwards as well. So, I think this backfield is unfortunately slightly cursed because, like we've touched on several times already tonight, Lamar Jackson is kind of a hybrid player. He is truly a quarterback running back. He's an
RB1. He's an RB1.
And like you said, for good reason too. So I mean,
yeah. But now, but yeah, to jump. But I mean, I don't want to beat these guys up too much at the running back position or their offense in general at that fantasy value. I mean, they do have guys. You talked about the skill players that they do have. I do think Marquise Brown, very skilled player. Loved him at Oklahoma. I don't think he's ever going to be that guy, though. I think you think the same thing.
I do. And like I said, I like Marquise Brown a lot. I just don't like him with the pressure of being a number one receiver. I think he can make great plays. And I think the best thing the Ravens, did for Marquise Brown was draft Rashad Bateman. And even adding Sammy Watkins just to kind of open up the field for Marquise Brown. I personally think there's a chance that this all comes together, but I think that you're kind of relying on Rashad Bateman to really step up this year. If he can come out and have, a rookie year like a DK Metcalf or AJ Brown, like we've seen recently, and just step in and be a number one receiver, no questions asked. I think this offense has a chance to kind of take off, but that's the big question mark for me personally is Rashad Bateman. And that kind of moves into a fantasy question I want to ask you as well is, do you see any value in drafting Rashad Bateman with his ADP average at 159 and him being ranked on average receiver 61 overall? Yeah.
It's actually, that's too funny because I was just about to ask you a very similar question, but let's spice it up a little bit. Okay. Let's say Rashawn Bateman, Sammy Watkins, who are you going to take here? Because you got Sammy Watkins at ADP 218, wide receiver ranked number 79. So basically going undrafted almost. And you have
Sure.
Rashawn Bateman at the very end of the draft. So kind of similar places. You're going to be able to get these guys if you want them. I think in a dynasty perspective, it's obviously Rashad Bateman. I love Rashad Bateman. Had a great career in Minnesota. I loved watching him Saturdays. Sammy Watkins, I think there's a sneaky chance if he stays healthy, ends up having a really decent year.
Yeah,
But I'm gonna take Rashad Bateman out of those two. But
me too.
To be honest, I'm probably staying away. So I think your best value out of these two guys, even though I like Rashad Bateman both as a player and a fantasy prospect more, I think your best value is at Sammy Watkins because you can get him for dirt, and they're none of them are really going to see that great of touches.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm probably going to stay away from this receiving core in general, other than Mark Andrews, of course, is someone who I think is a great fantasy pick. If you're going to go ahead and come out and solidify your tight end position pretty early on, he's kind of lingering between tier 1 and tier 2, depending on different opinions out there, but someone that you're probably going to take at least by the 4th round. But as far as the receiver core goes, I just, and I think you and I can both agree, we usually aren't in terms of drafting a strong receiver in fantasy. We're more of a running back heavy type drafting strategy. So we are obviously always looking for sleepers, but I think early on, where Marquise Brown is going to be going, I don't think it's someone either of us would ever kind of target in a fantasy draft. But I will go ahead and disagree with you. And I think that Rashad Bateman is someone you can get late. Let's say if your fantasy draft just didn't quite turn out how you wanted it to, and you feel very weak at the receiver position, I think this is someone that you can take a chance on towards the end of the draft and kind of let it play out as the season starts to begin. And he may get like I said, it may come out and he may be kind of like a DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, and just be able to step in right away. But only time will tell. Regardless, this is a very exciting offense. I think we were both really excited to watch a lot of the Baltimore Ravens this year. At the end of the day, I think this trio of Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, and Mark Andrews is up there with the best in the league. So
definitely up there within the best in the league. I mean,
yeah.
I think when you stack it up, I think that's a very solid unit. It'll be interesting to see how Mark Andrews does in the next year. 4th round's really rich for any tight end, but for people like Kyle Pitts or other guys that are getting so much hype, it's like I'm choosing Mark Andrews over a lot of people. And if I know you made a video, talking about tight end strategy, tight ends in general. Mark Andrews should be noted of. He should be recognized as one of those elite guys. Yeah. And a major part of that is because Lamar Jackson goes to him whenever he's nervous. Yep. Which is a lot as a quarterback because that's not what he's comfortable. He's a great passer, but that's just not his bread and butter.
Yep. Yeah. Also, like I touched on, he's proven that he trusts Mark Andrews in the red zone, which has, is a huge fantasy implication within itself. So lots to look forward to. Is there a more fun player to watch than Lamar Jackson in the NFL? I'm not sure. As soon as the ball is in his hands, you just don't know what's going to happen. So I think that's a good transition point to go ahead and move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. Talk about a quarterback who we have not seen had the ball in his hands too often. Unfortunately, primarily due to injury last year, but also due to young age. So for the Cincinnati Bengals, I will be defending a trio of Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, and I have chosen Jamar Chase as my wide receiver. So let's go ahead and just talk about Joe Burrow for a minute.
I got to stop you real quick before
Okay.
we get into the Bengals.
Okay.
As interesting as this can be, it is kind of funny that we transitioned from the Ravens to the Bengals when there was that famous Lamar Jackson spin move that he put on them where he cooked out like two or three guys at one time. Great NFL moment. And again, another reason why the Ravens are the most exciting offense in the league
Yeah, that
sometimes.
was what I believe you're referencing was Lamar Jackson's first game he started against the Bengals.
Yeah,
Uh,
roasted him.
yeah, I remember watching it. I was at work. It was a Monday night game, or maybe a Thursday night game, Thursday or Monday night. I was watching on my phone in the back of the store, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh! Like the Ravens got this right, man! Like
Yeah.
they got it right. They knew what they were doing with that draft pick. So many people, passing on Lamar Jackson, definitely regretting it to this day. No room for the Bengals to pass on Joe Burrow,
No,
number one
none.
overall
They
pick
got it.
last year.
Looks like they
Hey,
got it right there too.
and I don't know if you remember this. My Allison, my wife's and I's bachelorette party. At the end of the night, we're sitting on the couch and we're watching an LSU game. I think against Texas. I
Yeah, I
don't.
think it was. I forget who the opponent
Yeah,
was, but I
yeah,
do remember watching Joe
yeah.
Burrow,
And
and
I'm
we
just
were
sitting
like,
there like
"Damn,
yeah, I'm
this
like,
kid."
who is that guy? That guy is
Yeah,
really good at football.
he's a
And
beast.
you're a little bit more in tune with college football than I am. So I'm sitting there looking at you like, who's that guy? Is he what's going on with him? And by the end of the year, he's the next Peyton Manning behind me here.
Yeah,
It seemed like as every month progresses, like this guy's a real deal. And I think we saw a lot of that last year. And it's very, very unfortunate. We only got to see Joe Burrow play in 10 games. He kind of started off a little more hot than he did as the season started to progress. But still, when you look at 10 games in the NFL as a rookie, just under 2,700 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. By rookie standards, those are good numbers. However you want to swing it, and from a fantasy perspective, he's going at QB number 13, which is pretty interesting. I think that shows a lot of confidence in what people think about Joe Burrow. Um, and, I think we're both Joe Burrow fans. And I think this is, you could argue this is the biggest question mark of this division is what is Joe Burrow going to do? And what is hopefully his first full season as a starting quarterback in the National Football League. And I don't know about you, but I really do believe that Joe Burrow can be as good of a pocket passer as anyone in the NFL.
yeah, and I mean, he doesn't need to be a pocket passer. I mean, this guy's really fast too. I mean, he can
Sure.
run the ball too.
Yeah.
Although I think if the Bengals are smart, because they already weren't smart by not drafting a lineman, but if they're smart, they'll try to keep him in the pocket a little bit more. Because this guy didn't just like tear some stuff. Like he's got a new knee basically, and he's not like old, but he is already an older quarterback. At the end of the day, I think that's going to be a serious implication kind of going forward. There's not 100% certainty he's going to be ready week one.
Yeah.
But with what you're saying about kind of his outlook of next year, I mean, you look at his stats last year, under 2,700 yards, but at the end of the day, only played 10 games. He didn't even finish the 10th game, obviously, because of Chase Young. But if you look at that and you kind of project it out to next year, there's no way this guy doesn't throw for 4,500 yards, being on quite possibly one of the worst teams. That defense is going to give up points galore, and he's got a stacked receiving core full of options, and Joe Mixon who can catch the ball out of the backfield. I do think he's going to throw a ton of yards down the field. Touchdowns, maybe not. I actually think great comparison is Matt Ryan over the past few years. If you look at his stats, he throws a hell of yards, but not a ton of touchdowns.
Sure.
So I think that's what maybe we could be seeing out of him kind of going forward with that upside of he's going to run it.
Sure. Yeah, I like that comparison to Matt Ryan. And when you start to kind of look at the rest of this team, we saw an injury to Joe Mixon last year. A lot of people, still high on Joe Mixon as a running back, both in fantasy terms and in real life terms as well. Currently looking at RB12 overall in fantasy with an average draft projection of number 17. And I think Joe Mixon is a great NFL running back, and I hope that he can stay healthy because he definitely is someone who is going to be able to take that pressure off of Joe Burrow, and kind of help in both not just the rushing game but also the receiving game as well. And I think he's definitely the obvious choice in terms of running back for this trio. There's really no one else to put down here. But I think if he stays healthy, we're going to look at another season of 1,000+ yards and at least 5 touchdowns, maybe 2 or 3 receiving touchdowns at least. But I think Joe Mixon has a pretty high ceiling if this offense can really start rolling as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to touch on as far as Joe Mixon goes, because unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to evaluate. I mean, we know what he can do when he's healthy, but that's kind of the biggest problem as well. Is we've only seen one season where Joe Mixon was fully healthy. So
Yeah, and I mean, not even. I mean, I guess in 2019, I think you're referring to where 15 out of 16 games he started.
Yeah.
So, but honestly, after kind of having the stats laid out here, looking at where he's going to go in the draft, I am even more high on Joe Mixon as a fantasy asset. And I think in terms of just him, what he's going to contribute to this Bengals team, I think he's going to contribute a lot. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think they did let go Giovanni Bernard, who played a lot over Joe Mixon's career, honestly.
Sure, yeah.
They don't really have anybody else back there, like you were saying. But, you also got Joe Burrow coming back. He is injured, as we touched on. They want to have Joe Mixon maybe take some of that burden off of him because they didn't help him on the O-line. So maybe they bring Joe Mixon in, give him more touches, maybe closer to what he had in his peak years, which is like 250 average, maybe closer to 300. But he's also a great receiver. This guy's got a great upside. And when you look at his fantasy predictions, you got Joe Mixon going right after Antonio Gibson and Aaron Jones, right before Austin Eckler. Who do you take out of that range? Because I actually think Joe Mixon's got a bigger upside than all those guys just because of the volume, which is king at the running back position.
Yeah, I like Antonio Gibson a lot. I think he's probably the only player I kind of argue for in that tier. And I like him just about as much as I like Joe Mixon. So I see the value certainly in both of those players. And like you're saying, the volume is definitely there as well. So to answer your question, I the only player I would debate taking over Joe Mixon that tier is Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, and that's certainly fine. Antonio Gibson's a great player for Washington. I just think this could be the season. And again, like Joe Mixon, it's kind of it's not crunch time. Like he's got to come in here. It's his time now. I think that this season we could potentially see Joe Mixon's biggest workload ever. So if he does stay healthy, this could be a guy who does all it on the ground, all of it through the air. Again, keep the pressure off of Joe Burrow. Quick dump off passes, screens, outlet kicks, hand the ball off, draw plays, anything to just get the ball out of there. I think this could be somebody that really turns it up.
Yeah, that was the first thought, I had as well is the key to keeping Joe Burrow healthy outside of the offensive line, of course, is getting Joe Mixon consistently involved, not just in the run game, but in the passing game as well. So I certainly think the ceiling is very, very high for Joe Mixon, not just as a fantasy player, but as a player in general. So I think he's a great fit for this offense, and I certainly hope to see him healthy this year as well. Kind of the interesting where things get a little bit murky here. And this is actually my fantasy question for the night as well. For the Cincinnati Bengals, is how do we evaluate this wide receiver core as a fantasy value? It's very, very difficult. And Tyler Boyd is a very interesting player. We kind of saw him, out of nowhere come onto the scene in 2018 and kind of replace AJ Green as the most productive fantasy receiver for the Bengals. But since then, his numbers have slowly declined, which then brings in rookie from last year, T. Higgins, who someone I think was a great, waiver wire ad last year. Yeah, there you go, on your team as well. On one of my teams in a different league, but so kind of painful when a player you have is doing well, but also makes me slightly happy. Anyways, and then you bring in Jamar Chase this year out of LSU, a former teammate of Joe Burrow. So obviously, the speculation that you've got here is, there you kind of got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in a very similar range. But I do think it's interesting. I'm going to name a couple names of players that are being drafted after Jamar Chase. So you've got Jamar Chase looking at wide receiver number 29 on average, with an average draft projection ranked at number 65. So right after Jamar Chase on average, you've got guys like Chase Claypool going, DJ Chark of the Jaguars going, Robbie Anderson, Debo Samuel, even Juju Smith-Schuster, Jarvis Landry, Curtis Samuel. I mean, these are guys who have, even Brandon Cooks might be on the Houston Texans, but still a valuable receiver in fantasy terms as well. And these are guys all going after a rookie in Jamar Chase. So there's obviously a lot of confidence in what Jamar Chase can do as a receiver in the National Football League, but also a lot of confidence that him and Joe Burrow are going to kind of rekindle that connection. In 2019 alone, Jamar Chase caught 20 touchdowns, just under 1,800 receiving yards. So we know that he can play in those big situation games. We know that he has rapport with Joe Burrow, who supposedly convinced the front office to go out and draft Jamar Chase over an offensive lineman. But outside of all of that hype and that speculation, which, I think is reasonable, you've still got Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, who in the last 2 years were just under 1,000 receiving yards. Tyler Boyd last year, 4 touchdowns, T. Higgins, 6 touchdowns. But still, when you look at the two, they combined for 218 targets. So there's a lot to kind of evaluate in terms of fantasy and in terms of real life football as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or anything that is, you're wanting to say about all of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at what the Bengals are doing here, they're kind of modeling their offense as of the Bengals of old with, Chad Johnson, Chris Henry, their old receiver, I believe his first name was Chris, and TJ Houshmandzadeh. This big receiving core with a studded quarterback, Carson Palmer. And then they got like serviceable backs, right? So it's kind of cool to see them kind of sticking with their DNA, right?
Sure.
But when you do look at this team, you see 3 receivers here, all good. Like, let's not diminish Tyler Boyd. I feel like he just gets swept under the rug amongst a lot of fantasy projections and everything like that. But I don't think it's his fault. And I think if he was on a different team, I do think he'd get more of a look.
Sure.
So breaking out in 2 segments. One, I think when you've got a team this rich in talent at the wide receiver position, it's only going to benefit one guy, and that's the quarterback. And I think that that's really a major consensus you can pull from this going forward next year is Joe Burrow is going to really do well with this kind of system where he's got they're almost breaking it out to like an LSU offense of old, where they've got all this spread offense out. And I've already heard rumors that maybe Joe Brady becomes the new head coach when they eventually fire this terrible coach in Zach Taylor. Take the old OC from LSU and reunite this whole crew. And I think that would be very, very exciting. But just to stay on the par here, I think when you look at this fantasy group of receivers, you got to kind of analyze it the same way you're going to analyze that Pittsburgh Steelers set. And you got to say, where's my best value? So I'm looking at here. You got T. Higgins, ADP 58, wide receiver number 26. Jamar Chase, ADP 65, wide receiver number 29. So coming into this, I actually thought that it was going to be reversed. I did not think T. Higgins was going to have that kind of recognition. A little bit less of a big buzz type of name.
Yeah.
Even though he's really proven hell of a player last year, and he didn't even play all 16 games, which is even more incredible. But I think you got to stick with value here. So I think out of those two, whoever is the best value, you take them, because I think they're going to be pretty similar, honestly. Sure. I do see touchdown upside leaning to Jamar Chase, though. And sure. I think that comes to chemistry, talent, and explosion. So I do lean Jamar Chase as of now.
Yeah. And just to go back to that Jamar Chase point, I mentioned receivers taken after Jamar Chase, which definitely shows the confidence of what people are speculating is going to do. But look at some of these names, right in that tier before Jamar Chase is being drafted. I mean, you've got Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, Odell Beckham, Deontay Johnson, and Cortland Sutton, and T. Higgins as well. Only about 3 or 4 spots on average away from Jamar Chase. So that also just solidifies the confidence that people have going into this 2021 season. I mean, those are not receivers who are being overlooked this year. Those are not receivers that are being undervalued or receivers to joke about. Those are proven receivers in the NFL. So there's definitely the speculation there. There's definitely a lot of confidence from a lot of people that this is going to not only be a great fantasy receiver, but a great receiver moving forward the next couple of years in the National Football League as well. So I think we're both excited as well for the Cincinnati Bengals team. Definitely hoping to see everyone stay healthy. And I think, Joe Burrow's got as good of a chance as any player for that Comeback Player of the Year award. And we certainly hope to see him bounce back. And with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about a team who is being led by another overall number 1 NFL quarterback.
Baker Mayfield.
Yes, Baker Mayfield. So I will let you kick that off.
I got to say, coming out of college, I don't know if I've been more pumped about a player since Reggie Bush. And the thing that I think I was so enthused about Baker is why he's a good quarterback. It's that swagger. It's that leadership. It's that he's going to control whatever room he's in. He can come into a room with Odell Beckham and own the room. And that's what you really need at quarterback. You don't necessarily need the most talented guy. FYI, guys, Tom Brady isn't the most talented player, but he's going to own that room. And I think Baker's got that in him. And we're going to talk a lot about the Browns, I think, going forward, because it's a Super Bowl team right here. And everything hinges on Baker Mayfield. That's the only piece that is yet to kind of be solidified. But with head coach Kevin Stefanski, I think it's 1 year closer to that. I think Baker Mayfield is really comfortable with Kevin, and Kevin knows how to coach him and knows what he's comfortable with. I mean, Baker Mayfield, over the last part of that season, the guy was on fire. I mean, you could put him up there with the top guys, not as a fantasy player, but as just a quarterback in general. Very efficient player. So before we even really get to the fantasy side of Baker, I don't want to kind of, because we're going to start tarnishing the guy. Let's just talk about him as a quarterback. What do you like about this guy? What do you not like about him? And kind of what do you see him being next year as a player for them?
I like Baker Mayfield, I think, for the same reason you like Baker Mayfield. That confidence, that, borderline arrogance, that is absolutely what you want in a quarterback, but it's also controlled. And I think that was a big concern coming out of college for obviously not the Browns. I mean, they took him number one overall, but for, that was a part of the buzz, right? Is can we get this guy to mature? Is he going to be able to control his emotions? And in the NFL, you should play with some of your emotions on your sleeve, right? But it has to be controlled. And he has certainly proven that he can do that. He had, you could argue that Baker Mayfield had the best rookie season a quarterback has ever had. He didn't even play a full year. So I 100%, I'm going to double down on your position, not to be boring, but this guy is a great leader. And I love that point that you made that he can come into the same room as Odell Beckham and he is still the number one guy. And you're absolutely right. That is the most important aspect of a quarterback. And you just kind of get that feeling when watching the Browns play that as those tough games, those nitty gritty games that come down in the final minute, those games in the regular season that feel like they're a playoff game, but they're not. You just feel like Baker Mayfield would strap every offensive player on the field to his back and carry them into the end zone. Like, this guy does not care about any outcome other than winning. And, quite frankly, I understand where people want to kind of harp on his stats, but this guy can play quarterback at the NFL level. And I think the thing that kind of gets out of hand these days is we see guys like Patrick Mahomes and the way he passes the football. We see guys like Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray who might not have the best passing stats, but they make up for it with their running stats. And we kind of forget that you do not have to have lights out stats as a quarterback to be a winning quarterback. Peyton Manning, a great example, right? In this final season, injury plagued, so a little bit different, but still, everyone knew at the end of the day in that playoff run and that Super Bowl run, hey, Peyton Manning's on the field, right? This guy does not care about anything but winning the damn football game, right? And that's what I feel that Baker Mayfield has proven to the NFL. And I think about that quote all the time. I woke up feeling dangerous, right? Yeah. I mean, I every time I see Baker Mayfield, that's what I think. Like, hey, that guy, he's dangerous, right? Yeah. I mean, what better word to describe him? So,
and I think, no, but just, opposite of dangerous, safe. Let's look at the improvement at that interception number there. 2019-21, by far his worst year. I'm going to contribute a lot of that to Freddie Kitchens. Awful coach. Glad he's gone. 2020 comes back, he interceptions, super efficient. And I think that's a great testament to Kevin Stefanski. And I think that's what we can see next year too. Sure. There was also a couple games, and this impacted Jarvis Landry's numbers, a couple other guys, skill position guys' numbers too last year. They had some severe weather last year in a couple of their games. I forget which matchups they were, but it was like torrential downpour, heavy winds. No quarterback was really going to throw the ball around, so he didn't throw it. But jumping onto the fantasy side, because I think you do need to at least acknowledge it.
Sure.
Baker Mayfield's going 131 ADP, quarterback number 17. So when you look at this, you're seeing Baker Mayfield basically go at the very end of the draft if he's getting drafted,
Yep.
which I think is about right.
Well, let me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just keep this in mind too. He is being drafted on average in between Ryan Fitzpatrick and Carson Wentz.
Yeah. And I mean, here's my thought, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about, I think, some of the upside of this offense. I think this is a guy who has more upside than both those guys.
Sure.
Because let's say Odell Beckham comes back healthy, 85% healthy. And I think there was obviously a lot of murmurs, a lot of talk about, oh, Baker can't play with Odell. Nah, man, anybody can play with Odell. I just think Baker's grown and understands now that he's like, I can't force feed it to one guy. Sure. I think he's grown as a quarterback. So now you throw Odell back into the mix. A lot more opportunities here. I take Baker over both those guys to answer your question.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I will slightly mention, I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is a sneaky fantasy value, but that's a topic for another video, right? But yeah, I don't disagree with you. I look at this team from their O-line to the tight end position, to their receiver core, to their backfield, to their quarterback. And I think this is a damn scary football team. And I think this is a team that can be as good as any other team in the league and as any other team in the AFC, including the Tennessee Titans, including the Kansas City Chiefs, and including the Baltimore Ravens.
They're really good. Yeah, I mean, we'll wait till the end of the segment to talk about over-unders, but we're not talking about if they're going to win X games. We're talking about are they going to go to the Super Bowl? That's the difference with these guys. So, and again, it all hinges on Baker. But switching over to a guy who is very fantasy relevant, number 6 running back in ADP in player ranking this year, Nick Chubb.
Yep.
I love Nick Chubb as a player. I love Nick Chubb as a fantasy player as well. This year, I'm not drafting him, to be honest. I got spooked off kind of going through this exercise of looking at these guys, looking at him and Kareem Hunt. Again, volume's king for me. And Nick Chubb gets a lot of volume. He is the best running back on this team, but you could see a lot of games where they just are winning to a point where they're just like, shit, we're not going to put Nick Chubb in there. We're just going to give the ball to Kareem Hunt. Or they're down, so they put Kareem Hunt in to get that, more of a pass catching kind of vibe to catch up. So I don't want to take a guy at where he's at. I mean, he's at number 6. I get it. Yeah, like we do both place a lot of emphasis on the running back position, but I think this year's too, there's going to be different strategies that are available as well. So I'm not as hot on Nick Chubb.
Let me give you this stat for Nick Chubb. 12 games he played last year, 12 touchdowns.
Consistency.
Yeah. I mean, we'd have to break that down.
Let me tell you this.
Sure.
192 attempts running the ball. 190 attempts. That's less than J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah.
Or that's like right on par with J.K. Dobbins, basically.
Yeah. I like Nick Chubb. I mean, I had him last year in fantasy in our league. I definitely wish, he had stayed healthy the whole year. And I think that's actually my biggest concern with Nick Chubb. I have no concern about his production. I have no concern about drafting him in the top 10 of fantasy. I don't doubt what he can do. I don't even with Kareem Hunt being in the mix, I'm very big on Nick Chubb. Other than the fact that I am, that having him on my team last year, that injury, might just be personal vendetta, but it just kind of stays lingering in the back of my mind. So that's really my only concern personally with Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Nick, you're seeing a great guy, a great player. But when I look at kind of who's right after him, you got Zeke Elliott, you got Jonathan Taylor, you got some guys that can really be X factor. You got Aaron Jones in there too, who, obviously a lot's relying on Aaron Rodgers, but that's why I think I'm shying away, just because of the value there. But at the end of the day, he's going to be a great player. He's going to be a great fantasy asset if you can take him. And kind of on that same line, while we're at that running back position, let's talk about Kareem Hunt in terms of what do you view him as a fantasy asset? Is there certain strategies that maybe lean it to more of a possibility of going up and taking him? I think he's right now going to be around that 4th round almost. So what are your thoughts about that?
I like Kareem Hunt a lot. I've been taking him in a lot of mock drafts. I have a feeling that as the regular season starts to approach us, he is going to be moving up slightly in terms of fantasy rankings. I don't think he will last as long as he is in mock drafts currently, because I think people understand the value of this football team and the value of this backfield. Obviously, as we touched on, Nick Chubb was injured last year, so Kareem Hunt only started 5 games, although he did play, if I'm not mistaken, he played throughout all 16 games last year as an RB2 if he was not starting over an injured Nick Chubb. So when you actually look at that, he has very good numbers, 841 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, and on the receiving side of things, 304 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. So I think regardless of if Nick Chubb is healthy or not, this is as good of an RB2 on a football team as you will find this year. And like I said, I believe that if he does not move up in draft projections closer to week 1, that there's going to be multiple people in your league targeting Kareem Hunt. So I do think it'll be harder to kind of have him as a sneaky value in later rounds, realistically speaking. But if he is kind of floating around, I think, it'll be between the 4th and the 6th round at latest. And any of those.
If he falls to 5th round, you got to take him. I think in that 4th round, you can still maybe think about some other options. Not necessarily at the running back position. I think more it'd be around the wide receiver position.
Sure.
Potentially tight end if you're one of those guys.
Yeah. And I will say, you had asked if there's any fantasy strategies. If you're not drafting running backs early, if you're loading up at receiver, and if you're drafting a guy like Travis Kelce or Darren Waller early, again, a quarterback early, and you're weaker at that running back position, this is a guy that, Kareem Hunt is someone that you absolutely need to target. So,
yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna, as we get closer and closer to the fantasy draft, we're gonna start learning more and more about how excited I am about David Montgomery.
Sure.
If you look at kind of right before Kareem Hunt, kind of in that last tier before him, you're gonna see that again, that David Montgomery, that Chris Carson type of player right there. So let's say your first 2 rounds, you start emphasizing the wide receiver position, block them up, and then go get 2 running backs slightly less value. That's a good strategy as well. But I think you could really kick in those first 3 rounds, like you were saying, taking wide receivers, tight ends, then come in and get Kareem Hunt, who I would really say coming into each year can be seen as a true flex player every week. You can lock him in your flex, but he's got serious RB1 upside. But I think he's got a really high floor. I mean, I think he's going to get you 8 to 10 points kind of like as a base every week. And I think, before we talk this week about this division a little bit, just as a preview, I think I was like a little bit less likely to lean towards Kareem Hunt, but then we started talking about it, and it made me divert my attention from Nick Chubb to Kareem just because of the value you can get on this guy 3 rounds later, maybe 4 rounds. So I think that's really something to look at coming into the draft. I think you gotta kind of keep your eyes on a guy like that.
Do you imagine drafting Both of these guys, both Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt.
I want to say I have seen somebody do that before, and it works out. I mean,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, both these guys had close to 12 touchdowns each.
yeah,
I mean, they are the engine of this offense, which is why Baker Mayfield's touchdowns are down because
yeah,
they run the ball nonstop, and that's not changing next
yeah,
year.
yeah. I mean, this O
Dominant.
line is the best in the league. I think that's I mean, there are debates, but I think it's pretty easy to debate that this is the best line in the National Football League, and they should run the football as much as they do, and they should give the ball to both of these backs. What I mean, what a diverse either these running backs can do. They can do it all. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just when you look at
It's
both of
lightning and
these.
thunder, man.
Yeah, I mean, what a good duo. What a treasure box Kevin Stefanski has with these guys. And I am interested to get your thoughts on this receiving core as well. I do see that
Yeah.
you're picking, not to speak for you, but that you picked Odell as your receiver for your trio. And I'm knowing you, I'm a little,
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised by that. So I'm interested to get your thoughts here.
Yeah. So my trio, Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham at receiver. And then at running back, this is kind of one of those times where I'm very mixed. I put it Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt,
Sure.
almost split, but got to lean one way. I'm going to go Kareem, honestly. But at the end of the day, I think Odell Beckham, like you said, I've been a hater of Odell Beckham for a long time after being obsessed with him when he first joined the league. I watched his preseason games and I was like, holy, this guy is going to be nuts. It's been a long time since that's happened. And it's not really his. I try not to blame people for this because fame can do a lot to people, but it does seem like he's gotten overcome with everything that's outside of football. And he gets a lot of attention from the refs. He gets a lot of attention from the media, and that takes takes a toll in your career. And now we've really got to look at him as a player who hasn't done like anything of value for 3 years now. I mean, it's been a long time since Odell Beckham has really been there. So I'm saying all that to say this. I think he's going to be the best player on their team in terms of receiver. And that kind of isn't necessarily like go drafting kind of thing. Because if you look at this receiving core, I actually think it's probably the worst thing about this team. They do have Jarvis Landry, obviously, Rashawn Higgins, Donovan Peoples-Jones. They've got serviceable receivers. I think their tight end position, people say it's pretty deep. I'm not really a huge fan of Austin Hooper and David Njoku, especially not David Njoku. I don't think he's all there in the head. He doesn't give it all on the field. But I think Odell Beckham, I'm a believer that he's going to come back healthy this year. And he's going to come back probably 85%, 80% of what his peak Odell was. Because I don't think we're ever going to see that again. I mean, this was a guy who could have been, literally, there was a time where this guy could have been the best receiver of all time. Nobody's ever going to catch Jay Rice's stats, but I mean, he was on pace to do those things.
Yeah.
And you look at his numbers, 2018, he had 124 targets. 2019, when his first year coming to Cleveland, he had 133 targets. He's going to be your target hog. He's going to be your target hog. And Baker, he's going to still be the number one threat on this team.
Sure.
ADP 94, wide receiver number 25.
Let me go ahead and cut you off here. I love Odell Beckham. I'm always big on Odell Beckham. I drafted him in 2018 and 2019. I don't believe in our league, but in other leagues. Last year was the first year I did not have him in a fantasy league, but I've always believed in what Odell can do in terms of fantasy and even in terms of real life football too. So my question would be, at that ADP and at that ranking and where you're kind of getting him in fantasy, are you drafting Odell Beckham this year?
Yeah, it depends on if I need a receiver at that point, which knowing my draft strategy, probably am going to be targeting a receiver around that point. At that, he's looking like he's going right after Cooper Kupp, Brandon Ayuk, Tyler Lockett, and right before T. Higgins, Deontay Johnson, and Cortland Sutton. I'm taking him before Brandon Ayuk, that's for sure. But I am taking him after Tyler Lockett and Cooper Kupp. So I think that's a really nice spot for him where he's at right now. I actually don't know if I see a whole lot of change between now and the actual draft. I don't see him rising or lowering.
Yeah.
How about you, though? I don't know how you feel about Odell. I know in the past you've been burned. So.
Yeah, I think in that, I think I'm kind of hesitant from a fantasy perspective, but I also, especially what I'm seeing in terms of my strategy this year, I don't think within that tier I'm going to be needing a receiver at that point. But I've also seen a lot of drafts where people are passing on Odell, with concerns of what we're going to see this year and injury concerns and for a lot of different reasons, right? Not a lot of confidence that he will be the number one receiver or be able to go back to like what you said about 80-85% of what he was. So I do think that if he begins to float kind of into that tier 5 of receivers, that he's a very valuable fantasy choice. And I don't think it's going to fall in terms of my strategy. So to answer your question, I don't think he's necessarily someone I'm going to be targeting this year. But I certainly see the value if he kind of floats down into that tier 5, and I'm looking at DJ Chark, Robbie Anderson, and Odell. Then just with the upside and the ceiling that this team as a whole has to offer, it definitely makes my decision a lot more difficult. I'm pretty dead set within that tier 5. I really like Robbie Anderson, someone who we talked about in one of our previous podcasts. Mm-hmm. And I really like Chase Claypool around that value as well, not to jump into our next segment of the night. But if I see him floating around, that definitely makes it a tougher decision because, like I said, I've always believed in Odell. And I think this team has as high of a ceiling as it's ever going to have this year. And I really like the fact that you're coming out and saying that this is going to be their number one receiver on the team and that he's going to have a huge impact, because I think that a lot of people are still brushing off Odell. And with what we've seen Odell do, certainly through his first 3 years of playing the NFL, hey, this guy has the talent. Odell knows how to play football in the NFL. And if he can kind of, take that role, that mentorship role, that leadership role, I really do think that he can come out blazing and, like you said, have, certainly be the best receiver on this team. But wouldn't be something to see Odell come out and just have the best season of his career, or at least numbers closer to his first 3 years in the NFL? He's barely broken 1,000 yards since, kind of, yeah, exactly. Since those first 3 years as a playing in the NFL. And, at the end of the day, I want to see Odell play well. I've always been a huge fan of Odell. But I think it's interesting when you look at the other receivers on this team as well. Jarvis Landry, kind of one of those PPR gods in terms of fantasy football, but also Jarvis Landry is he kind of feels like a perfect number 2 to a healthy 85% Odell Beckham Jr. Yeah, I mean, and I think Jarvis Landry is as tough as they come. I mean, he he kind of, I feel like he resembles a lot of the same of what Baker Mayfield resembles. I feel like this guy, ever since his days in Miami, he cares about winning and he cares about playing harder than anyone else plays on the field around him, offensively or defensively. I think this guy is as good as a competitor as there is in the NFL. And I love Jarvis Landry, man. I'm actually surprised that you didn't pick Jarvis Landry, just kind of knowing.
Yeah,
But
I took Jarvis, I think, in the past 2, maybe 3 years
yeah,
in fantasy. And a large part of that is because this is someone who's so consistent week to week. And if you're a late receiver drafter, that's what you're really kind of aiming for. It's just
yeah,
somebody who week over week is going to give you a pretty consistent floor.
yeah.
This year's a little different. I actually do think Jarvis could be on the back half of his career for sure. I think he's had a lot of injuries over the past season or two that are kind of not in the right areas. It's like the knee, it's like the legs. He's definitely getting older, and he plays that position where he's in the inside a lot that gets beat the hell up. I will say one thing he's got in his favor is he's definitely Baker's favorite player to go to.
Yeah.
They have a lot of connection, a lot of mind meld there. But I do think when Odell's back, he's healthy. I think Odell's going to take over. And I think that's honestly a good thing for Jarvis at a certain extent too, because maybe Jarvis's number will become a little bit more efficient. He's not going to be catching these short passes for like nothing. They might actually go for something. And I think these two together could become maybe a top 4 receiving core if they're both healthy, both going full force. And I think that's going to be key to this team too. But when we're talking about a receiving core, past that too, I like Rashard Higgins. I think he's a good player to plug and play, but I'm not going to come out here and say that Donovan Peoples-Jones is like a good like thrower. I mean, he had a decent season. He had a couple like deep touchdown receptions, but they really are banking on that receiving core to stay healthy. And that's one area of potential weakness on this Browns team.
Yeah, I was interested to hear if you are going to bring up Rashad Higgins or not, because I really like Rashad Higgins, especially as a number 3 receiver, and especially if Odell comes out and performs like we're both hoping him to perform. When you look at Rashad Higgins, 6 games started last year, 599 receiving yards, as well as 4 touchdowns. But when you break that down, that's about 100 receiving yards per game started.
Yeah.
And I think now if you can take the pressure off and let him come into, a slot receiver, well, I don't think he'll be playing in slot receiver Jarvis around, but having him play as the 3rd receiver on this team, I think that could actually be pretty scary.
Definitely not as a fantasy asset, though. I would just say
no.
Yeah,
not as a fantasy asset whatsoever. Still going to stay away, barring any injuries. But from real life football perspective, I think that he makes a huge contribution to this team. And I think I don't disagree with you. I mean, obviously, this O-line is the best in the NFL. Obviously, we both have a lot of faith in Baker, and obviously, we both have a lot of faith in this backfield. So I'm not going to necessarily disagree that the receiving core and tight end position is probably the weakest part of this team, but certainly.
I think that's the way this team's built is
sure.
They don't need the receiving core to be the best part.
Sure.
And that's kind of what can really make this team dangerous is the fact that if the receiving core is the worst part of this offense and then Odell comes back, that's going to be really scary.
Sure.
And that's going to put this team into my position, like even a stronger Super Bowl candidate.
Yeah.
And again, we're going to talk about that later, but there's going to be some games where the Browns just smoke teams.
Absolutely.
But, another team that for the longest time has kind of run this division, but it might be in a different position this year. this Pittsburgh Steelers, jumping over to them, the last team to cover in this AFC North division. My tandem that I will talk about, my trio that I will talk about today, quarterback Big Ben. Apparently he's lost a few pounds this offseason. Running back Najee Harris. Love this guy. Definitely going to get into him. And then the leader out of this receiving corps, in my opinion, Deontay Johnson, who dropped a ton of passes last year. But I do think he's going to come back and he's going to be the most overall productive receiver for them. Yeah. Not necessarily their best asset on the fantasy side, but in terms of receiver, I think he's going to be the best productive player for them.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the Steelers team, actually. They kind of feel like the perfect example of what an AFC North team is. I mean, they're banged up, their quarterback's old, they've got veterans on the defensive side of the ball, got a rookie running back, they've got receivers who drop the ball. I mean, they're just a messy, gritty football team, right? And that excites me. And I think an interesting note, I don't want to talk too much because I know this is your respective or one of your respective teams for the night. But my biggest question mark is, what can Ben Roethlisberger get done this year? And if he does not get the job done, is this Ben Roethlisberger's last year as a Pittsburgh Steeler or not?
Yeah, I would say this is his last year, even if he does average. I think barring some ridiculously good season, like one of the best in his last 5 years, this isn't just the end of his time in Pittsburgh. This is the end of his career. I think this is him trying to get the rest of his contract. And, quite fairly, he took a discount on his deal, actually. But he's walking away from the game after this. And I don't think he's got too much left in the tank physically or mentally. So I'm hopeful for him that he comes out and he doesn't, leave another stinky performance on the field, because last 2 years have been really upsetting. And the NFL, similar to the Green Bay Packers, the league is not the same when the Steelers are bad. It was really cool to see them come out and be like 11-0 while nobody believed in them. At the end of the day, they were 11-0. Ben Roethlisberger was a big part of that. And I want to see the Steelers at least come out there and be a competitive team week to week.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not to stay on this topic too much, but we grew up, the main quarterbacks we watched growing up, Peyton and Eli Manning, Tom Brady. Then he kind of had this next tier, right? Ben Roethlisberger, could put Phillip Rivers in there, right? Matt Ryan. I mean, just kind of these very pocket passer quarterbacks who aren't going to do a lot of flashy things, but are going to throw the football a whole lot. And we're kind of watching them year by year kind of start to hang up the cleats. I do feel like this is kind of the end of an era for those quarterbacks that we grew up with. So it's a little bittersweet, but on that same note, just 3 years ago, Ben Roethlisberger threw for over 5,000 yards and over 30 touchdowns. And like you said last year, once again, no one believes in this team. No one believes in Ben Roethlisberger. And they come out and they're 11-0. And he still had a good season last year for a veteran quarterback. And like I said, this just feels like such an underdog team, right? All the hype is around Joe Burrow and this young Bengals offense and Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens and how they're going to run the ball all over you. And of course, the Browns are looking like the next, three-peat championship team. They just look incredibly stacked, right? They have all the pieces there, and it's just like, let's just ignore the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're a sloppy, old, They need to figure it out. They're at the end of their wits type team. And, to some degree, I can agree with some of that, but I'm still like, man, I don't know. They actually kind of feel to me like they have all the pieces. I don't want to
All
take
the
over your.
pieces, but they have all the pieces. But at the end of the day, as we're going through this trio, what we're seeing is that at the helm, Ben Roethlisberger, I don't think he has it. I actually, even though I'm hopeful, I actually do predict this being a really bad season for Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
I could see him coming out here, and hopefully that Tommy John surgery comes out and helps his arm after the surgery and everything. But I actually do see this being a season where he throws it less, though. I do think they hand the ball off more, which could potentially take away from the touches for this receiving core. I mean, he threw the ball an unreal amount of times these past couple seasons. And the main reason for that is their line's been kind of starting to get beat to shit. Their offensive line is dreadful this season.
Yeah.
Which is going to probably lead to a strategy of getting the ball out of Ben's hands quickly. So a lot of screen passes, a lot of slants, which I think opens the door to a guy like Deontay Johnson, who I picked. But honestly, I think at the fantasy side, you don't even think about Ben Roethlisberger. There's really no reason to take him. The only situation he's on my team is in maybe a setting where I've got a quarterback on bye week and they're playing the Detroit Lions. That's it. And I think that's a very possible situation where he's streamed, because I don't think he's picked up by anybody this whole season. And he's at quarterback 22. So, I mean, it's kind of going right after Tua. I mean, I just don't think anybody believes in him, at least in the standard popular drafts. If you're just doing it with your friends and family, I don't think anybody believes in this guy.
Yeah, I think more the attraction there is this receiving core. Obviously, there are 3 receivers who can play some football, and someone's going to be throwing the ball to them, and that's presumably Ben Roethlisberger. So, I think that's probably where people see most of that value.
Yeah, I mean, before we get to the receivers, I want to go to probably the most exciting part of this offense. And I don't think it's even just for this season. I think it's going forward. It's Najee Harris.
Yeah.
Najee Harris is a player who at Alabama, 2020, touchdowns from scrimmage, 30. I mean, this guy literally, he has been compared to Le'Veon Bell. But another thing I think it's important to look at is his attempts that he had in college, because a big concern with running backs when they're coming into college is that they've got such a big workload that they aren't going to kind of work out kind of going forward because of the injuries. This is a guy who never got over 250 attempts in college. Very fresh, very explosive player who I think is going to come in and instantly become a 3-down back with no competition. I think they've still got Benny Snell, Anthony McFarland, 2 running backs who literally could easily get cut like within a week or something. I mean, these guys are not good. It's going to be his show to lose. And I think, honestly, where he's going at ADP, I'm definitely taking him. I would take him at the back end of the first round or the beginning of the second round. And I'd be super happy with it, because what you also see in fantasy football is one of those peak age groups of that running back position is that rookie running back spot. I think in Dynasty, this guy's a can't miss, but just in terms of year-to-year draft each year, this is another guy that just like I would put even close to that Nick Chubb level. That's how excited I am about Najee Harris, just because he offers that receiving capabilities. And like I said, Ben Roethlisberger is trying to get the ball out of his hands quickly. A lot of screen passes. This guy can catch just like Le'Veon Bell could catch. And I think he works really hard. He's going to fit in the locker room really well. And coming from that Alabama setting, he's been quoted to say that Alabama, they worked harder. So he's ready for this. He's cut for this, and he's going to come in week 1. I think he's going to blow this league up.
Yeah, I mean, 50 touchdowns in his last 2 years playing at Alabama.
That's nuts. That's nuts.
I don't traditionally draft rookies in fantasy at all, or rookie running backs, because it's usually who you're going to take a gamble on, early on. But I'm actually surprised that Najee Harris isn't cracking the top 10 in fantasy running back rankings. Looking at his stats, as well as looking at where a lot of players like Zeke, like Saquon, like Christian McCaffrey, when you're looking at their college stats and where they were going, easily going in top 3, top 5 in their respective rookie years. I'm a little surprised that Najee Harris is kind of floating outside the first round and the first tier of running backs as well. But I also won't be surprised if a lot of people are looking at Najee Harris and saying, "Hey, that's my guy in the first round, or that's my guy in the second round." And if you compare Najee Harris with a guy like Nick Chubb, who we talked about earlier, with some of these other running backs, in that tier, let's say you have pick 11 or pick 12, and you have the opportunity to pair him with an Aaron Jones or Ezekiel Elliott or, endless possibilities, right?
That would be amazing. I would love seeking them together. That's like combined 500 touches. I mean, it's nuts.
Yeah, I think that this is someone who can be very, very dangerous this year in terms of fantasy.
To be honest, I've seen him talk a few times, like publicly, and I think this is somebody who is going to be a really fun player for fans. And so we're still about 1 month and a half, maybe, to like where fantasy really picks up for the everyday people. So I do see his draft stock rising a bit between now and the draft for sure. But if you look at where he's currently going behind the players that are currently going in front of him, Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, as we talked about earlier, who I am pretty high on, Antonio Gibson, Aaron Jones. I'll throw Jonathan Taylor in there as well.
Sure.
Can you tell me 2 names that you would take over Najee Harris? Because I can give you only one, and that would be Ezekiel Elliott.
And like I said, I am traditionally not someone who drafts rookie running backs early on, but I would probably agree with you.
I think his biggest concern is the offensive line. I think it's horrible, and I think that's definitely a glaring weakness. You've still got a couple free agents out there, Mitchell Schwartz, who's a great player. I think maybe they'll find somebody between now and the season to kind of shore that up, because it's definitely a glaring weakness. But I think when you're looking at what his projections might be for next season, I would not be surprised if this guy got the ball 300 times, which would be a career high for him, including college. But I think he can do it. And if this guy gets the ball 300 times, how do you not put him in the first round? It's just kind of boggles my mind. Definitely worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like I said, I don't know why I've always done that, where I just don't want to draft rookie running backs early. But I think I've finally learned my lesson, and I have no problem, even theoretically reaching for Najee Harris a couple picks if you're that confident in the pick and that's your guy, then why not?
I think you're that strategy. I love that strategy for every position outside of running back. And a lot of that has to do with the numbers game of the NFL. It's all about money. And this running back position is so expendable after their rookie contract. So they are literally, if they could do it, they want to give this running back 300 touches his first 3 to 4 years, and then burn him. No contract extension. Do you dirty like the Rams did Todd Gurley.
Hey, I mean, look at James Conner. James Conner is a good example. Of this team.
And I mean, I think they upgraded getting Najee, but that's kind of the thing. Like, it's not a knock on James Conner. I think he's a good player, but it's a really hard position. It's a position
Yeah.
that's beat to hell. And at the end of the day, you're looking at it and you're saying, all right, like Cam Akers is going to be in the same situation going forward now. He just got that massive injury. He might not be in a position where he's ever back to kind of this peak fantasy value ever again.
Yeah.
So the big thing is just kind of coming in there and knowing that you're going to get that expected touch total that Najee Harris is going to get.
Yeah.
But I'm going to actually let you kind of take a crack at this receiving core before I jump into it, because I said before, Deontay Johnson is my guy, but I'm interested to see what you think about this. And also keep out the fantasy part, because I want to hear what you think is just the receivers though first.
Sure. Yeah. Not to be extremely boring, but I agree with you. Outside of fantasy perspective, I do think Deontay Johnson kind of has that number one receiver presence, and he also seems to just be the guy who's on the field the most, and he seems to be the guy that Ben Roethlisberger wants to throw to the most. And Juju Smith-Schuster did actually start more games than him last year, but only one more game. But and did harness about 20 less targets last year. But it just kind of has felt like, since we saw his emergence as a rookie, that he seems to be kind of just that the player who is always there, because obviously you've got these three receivers and they're all good, right? And they're all talented in different ways, and they kind of eat at each other's numbers. None of them, touched 1,000 yards last year. But I don't really look at that as a bad thing, because they're combining for almost over 300 targets together. Which is very, very good in terms of real life and in terms of fantasy. But I do have to agree with you that I think that Deontay Johnson is the most valuable receiver, because I believe that he can play as many aspects of wide receiver, where Chase Claypool tends to kind of feel like that big-bodied guy who can break away, do some shifty things, but really I feel like a lot of his stats come from those big-time plays. And then Juju, to me, at this point in his career, feels like a red zone target. And I think Juju is a good receiver. I don't have anything bad to say about Juju. And I do think that Juju is best fitted in an offense like this, where he has these other receivers surrounding him. I don't think that he's ever, that's his sophomore year in the NFL. And where he kind of started to think this guy might replace AB, and that's what they tried to do. Although, all credit to Pittsburgh, they can draft some receivers like no other.
This is the receiver factory.
Yeah, but with all that said, it just feels like Deontay Johnson does a little bit of everything, and he just seems, even with the drops that you mentioned, he seems to me like the safest receiver out of these three. And so that's why I would double down on your position personally.
Well, he plays the Antonio Brown role. He was on 163 target pace last season. And again, he didn't even play all 16 games. And he also, the coaches kind of tried to teach him up a little bit by not letting him play as much, because he started dropping those passes, and he kept his head in the game. He stayed at it, and he was still, I think there's a ton of upside on this guy. But before I kind of start breaking into fantasy here, I also wanted to mention just how loaded these receivers are. That's not even to include James Washington, who plays a lot for these guys, and tight end Eric Ebron, who Eric Ebron's going very late in the draft. But I do think like somebody like him, who has shown tremendous skills in the red zone, could be really valuable for a guy like Ben Roethlisberger. And I think that that's some serious upside. But at the end of the day, too, I don't see him being really like a guy, like a my guy type of go draft him in the back half. I think this is more of a streamer pick.
Sure.
But Eric Ebron, I do think he's gonna be very productive for the Steelers
Yeah.
team next year.
Yeah,
Um,
I was wondering if you're going to mention James Washington.
mhm.
Definitely still a valuable receiver who, God forbid, we see one of these first three receivers, anything happen to them, there's no question who's going to step up to the plate. James Washington is a very talented receiver, and I think it's in the Steelers' best interest to have all four of those guys on the field as often as they can, and
Jeez.
Najee Harris and Eric Ebron. I mean, why
That's scary.
wouldn't you? Yeah, I mean, this team still has a lot of talent and a lot of good pass catchers. Definitely happy you
Yeah.
brought up James Washington and Eric Ebron as well.
So I'm gonna give you my pick at fantasy here. And at first it really was I was leaning towards Chase Claypool, and a lot of that was just because of value. In between that trio of Deontay Johnson at wide receiver 27, Chase Claypool at wide receiver 30, and Juju Smith-Schuster at 36. I targeted Chase Claypool as somebody who's probably going to have the big touchdown upside. Also, I think can make those weeks that really win you your week. But then I started thinking more about it, and I said, okay, so a lot of that projection's based off of the fact that we're going to see the Steelers throw as much as they did last year, which I don't think that'll be the case. And B, can Ben Roethlisberger really get it down the field this easy? I mean, is he going to want to throw it deep to Chase Claypool? I think he's going to be more inclined to throw it short. So I think if you're in a standard league, Chase Claypool is your guy because that touchdown upside is huge. But if you're in half PPR or PPR, it's like a no-brainer. Deontay Johnson's really the guy you want to get in this offense.
Yeah.
With that said, I don't know. I don't love to target a guy who's competing with literally three other receivers.
Yeah.
But you saw Deontay Johnson week over week kind of come out there and play really well for fantasy. It was very consistent somehow. And I think that that's something you got to consider. And Juju Smith-Schuster just gets kind of pushed to the side a little bit. I'm not targeting him in any drafts. And I really wish he actually went to the Kansas City Chiefs. Because imagine this guy on the Kansas City Chiefs, man.
Sure.
Just literally like,
Great fit.
Yeah, he should have signed there for a 1-year deal. I mean, he could have got the biggest contract of his career.
Well, like I said, I think he plays best, when surrounded by talent. So I think he's going to play well surrounded by Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson, and hopefully the emergence of Najee Harris as well. But yeah, just imagine him with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and being thrown to by our boy Patrick Mahomes. And even with Clyde Edwards-Helaire there and some of the other speedy receivers they have, right? Yeah, I think that would have been a great fit, but I did give him credit for wanting to stick with the team that drafted him and wanting to stick with the organization, even with rumors of some bad blood starting to circulate with some of his antics this past season.
TikToks.
Becoming a true diva receiver. Yeah.
But I love Juju off the field too. But yeah, those TikToks with him and Chase Claypool actually got a lot of heat too. So yeah, that's something that is a little concerning.
And I will say, I actually really like in terms of fantasy, I won't be targeting Deontay Johnson just because you have to give up a little bit more with an average ADP of 61 and his average receiving ranking looking at number 27. You have to give up a little bit more to get him. I do certainly agree that he is a higher PPR value other than or outside of Claypool and Juju. But I would argue that I actually really like where you can draft both Chase Claypool and Juju. I do really like their value, especially like you mentioned in standard leagues, both of them having 9 touchdowns last year. And they still both had over 100 targets.
Yeah.
Obviously the concern for all three of these receivers, not just Deontay Johnson, is the drops. All three, I mean, Deontay Johnson easily most drops out of all three. But when you actually start to evaluate things, Chase Claypool's still over 40 drops, as well as Juju right around the 40 mark. Deontay a little, closer to the high 60s. But in terms of a standard fantasy league and where you could draft both Juju and Chase Claypool, and even you could argue, if you've really built up your roster and you're confident in it and you're starting to move into your bench players, these are two very valuable number 3 fantasy receivers for your roster if you're happy with the first two and they're still floating around as those later rounds and those other players, tight ends, defenses, quarterbacks start to go. I do think these are two guys that should be on everyone's radar because a lot of people are wary of this receiving core and a lot of people are just saying no thanks, right? But I think there's value in all three of these guys.
Yeah.
The question is, do you want to take that risk or not? And the question would also be, does someone end up not having a good fantasy year? Does someone end up with the shit end of the stick, so to speak? But
I think I think there's a world where quite possibly the Steelers revert back. I actually think this is quite possible that the Steelers go back to the old way of playing Steelers football, where they actually try to ground and pound it a little bit more and try to control kind of the narrative of the game rather than always trying to pass it. And in that case, Juju Smith-Schuster is the clear and best run blocker on this team and has a very gritty way of him and is the leader in that receiving core too. And I think if they do that, we could see Juju on the field a lot more and very consistently than the rest of the receivers. And so that just spells more upside for Juju, who you can get mad late. And also, I do agree. I think as much as Eric Ebron is a attractive red zone option, Juju has the same sort of he has a better chemistry with Ben and is very big bodied and strong. So he can kind of overwork those slot corners and really kind of put them in a position where they can't guard his hands and get a lot of touchdowns, as he showed last year. I think you said 9 touchdowns. Yeah. So I think, I don't think you're right there. And honestly, I think I lost that debate because I do think Deontay Johnson is a better receiver, but and a lot of people are crapping on Juju Smith-Schuster, but at the end of the day, it's all about value. And you can get Juju way later. And if you're going to get a piece of the pie, get the cheapest piece. And because I think it's all going to be relatively similar.
Yeah. And, obviously, like I said, where you're drafting these guys, you should give a little bit more if you're going to draft Deontay Johnson. But all three of these guys are still coming in a very, very close value in terms of fantasy, and in terms of wide receiver ranking as well. So I'm excited for the Steelers team. I want to see them, come out and hand it to some of these other AFC North teams. I don't know if it's necessarily going to happen, but to say the least, I think they will be competitive. I don't think this is going to be an awful football team by any measure. I still think, Mike Tomlin is a great football coach. And I do think, leading into our over-under segment, that this team has as good of a defense as any team in the National Football League right now. This defense is freaking loaded. And if, Ben can come in and just do what he needs to do and score some touchdowns and let the defense take the pressure off of him and, have Najee Harris lead this team running and get these receivers going. I definitely think this team is going to be able to come out and win some football games. But I will let you go ahead and lead us into our over-under segment and us kind of, just quickly evaluating each team's schedule Um, and you know
Yeah,
what? Actually, let's just start with the Steelers. Why not? I know they're not at the top or at the bottom, but since we're already on the topic,
yeah. I
they're
think I think that's a good. I think that's a
yeah,
good place to start. Honestly, you look at the Steelers team as you started touching on. A really effective strategy for them would be to let the defense win the games. It's a loaded front. I mean, with T.J. Watt just signing Melvin Ingram, you've got some really good pass rushers there. The D tackles are amazing too. But then the thing that I love most about this defense is just the fact that they hit so hard every play and are so fast. You got players like Devin Bush on this defense who just run around like crazy and crack people. They definitely have an attitude to them. And the leader of this defense, in my opinion, whereas it's Mika Fitzpatrick
yeah,
coming in here, super clutch defender. He's a guy who he's the best ball hawk in the league, in my opinion.
yeah,
He catches it, he's going to the house, and was one of the best acquisitions from Miami. Really lost out on that situation because when they
yeah.
got him from Miami, I mean, Minka Fitzpatrick literally led them to the playoffs 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Like,
he
put them in that situation.
100% flourished. With that change of team, and I completely. I was wondering who you're gonna say because the whole time in my head I'm thinking, yeah, leaders is Fitzpatrick, right? I love Mika Fitzpatrick. Super. I mean, when you think about a lot of safeties in the league, you got to think of this guy as, I mean, you could easily argue is the best safety in the league. And we haven't really seen kind of since, those Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, Eric Berry kind of years starting to fade off. This guy's really making, a name for himself being that next big safety for the coming, you know, decade or so, right? And he's still young. I mean, and he's scary good. And I love this defense, as I already briefly mentioned. And it kind of ruined my our opening segment for me because as we started to plan, this podcast earlier in the week, I wanted to talk about Melvin Ingram, um, and what a better team for him to land with than the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, you're going to be playing, you're going to be, pass rushing with Devin Bush and T.J. Watt. I mean, we already know what he's done, prior years with Joey Bosa, and you're getting a very similar player, T.J. Watt. And I mean, that's a scary thought. Melvin Ingram can stay healthy. And that's terrifying for opposing offensive lines, and obviously Cameron Hayward's going to be on that D line as
Yeah,
well,
and
and
Stephon
Cameron
Tuitt.
Hayward by himself, I mean, he could just step on to it. I mean, it just doesn't ever end, right? Cameron Hayward, I think, is a very underrated player. I mean, that guy is lights out. Just
Yeah,
a good representation of defensive line of the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? And some of the great players that have played there. I think Cameron Hayward is as good of a representation as anyone. And, it is interesting when you think about the corners on this team. Remember when Joe Hayden, left the Browns and went to the Steelers? People are like, he's shown flashes. And he's a good corner, sure, but he's been on the Browns. Like I just don't really, think he's ever going to come full circle. But Joe Hayden has, in my opinion, been a
he's turned the
very
corner.
he's been a
Yeah,
very good corner for this Pittsburgh Steelers team, and not just a good corner, but a good leader. Good
yeah.
leader of that
He's got a
secondary,
swagger.
because
He's got
that's
a
kind of
he's
absolutely before Mika Fitzpatrick showed up. It's kind of uh, the part of the team. This part of the team that struggled, right, was their secondary, and I think Joe Hayden has really solidified that. And as long as he stays healthy, he makes a huge impact. And I think Terrell Edmonds is another great player at strong safety as well. So, in a nutshell, this defense is loaded, right?
yeah.
Um,
It's a stacked
yeah,
defense, and I think this defense is kind of the anchor to maybe why they even have 8.5 as their season projection for this year for their total wins. So DraftKings does have them as an over under of 8.5. And while we're talking about the great defense, we're talking about, the ultra loaded skill guys on offense. I'm actually going to take the under on this because I am not a believer of Ben Roethlisberger next year. And I think that the fact that they didn't invest in the O-line is really going to hurt them. And I love Mike Tomlin. I think he's a great coach. But if Ben doesn't show up, this could be really bad because they're not just competing against the Ravens and the Browns now. Now they've also got Joe Burrow. That could potentially be 5 losses.
Sure. Yeah, I will take the under as well, but not by much. I still see this team coming out and winning 8 football games, and maybe not in a competitive division like the AFC North, but generally speaking, winning 8 football games can get you to the playoffs now. With that extra playoff game added. A lot more has to happen, but we were seeing teams make the playoffs before that extra playoff round with only 8 wins, before. So it's not out of the question. But I think the Bengals, I think that's a great point that they're not just competing against the Browns and the Ravens, but the Bengals are also coming to fruition as well. So I think this division, you have to, I'm tempted to actually take the over, but the main reason I'm not going to is because the Ravens, the Browns, and the Bengals are going to win some football games this year. And so I will take the under with you, but not by much. I think there's still a lot to believe in with this team. But hey, like I said earlier, this is a make it or break it year. And this is really going to prove a lot of who Mike Tomlin is and who Ben Roethlisberger is as well. Although we have seen this team do well without Ben Roethlisberger under the leadership of Mike Tomlin during some injuries. But this just feels like, if any team has to prove something this year in this division, to me, it's the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, with that extra game on, the 8 games isn't going to cut it because you're going to have to probably win like 10 games to make it, maybe 9, but 8's not going to cut it anymore. 8-8 maybe could have done it in the past, but
like I said, in a division this competitive,
it's definitely not going to do it. I do think that another thing kind of working against them is, when looking at their schedule, they're playing outside of this division, which is stacked. They're playing the AFC West. So you got the Chargers and you got the Kansas City Chiefs. And then they're playing the NFC North. So they're playing Aaron Rodgers and Justin Fields and the Bears. So you're talking about playing like some team in the Vikings, which I think is going to be another good team next year. So I think it's going to be tough for them to really scrap it out. But if there's any coach that I could believe in to do it, it would be Mike Tomlin. But I'm going to take them at 7 games next season. I don't think this is going to be a good year for them, which could end up working in their favor because they're going to need that good draft pick to get Ben's replacement.
I was a little premature here. I didn't necessarily study their schedule hard enough. I'm gonna back out of my position. I'm gonna take the under at 7 wins as well. Week 1 you've got Buffalo. Week 2 you've got the Las Vegas Raiders, who are kind of that team that it might not be very good, but they're going to do whatever they can do to beat you. Then you've got your first division game versus Cincinnati. Then you're at Green Bay, theoretically against Aaron Rodgers, versus Denver the following week, which to me, another team kind of like the Raiders, might not be the best team, but they are going to try.
They're going to have a good defense. They're going to have a good defense next year.
Sure. And then you've got Seattle before the bye week. And then you've got Cleveland coming out of the bye week. Then you kind of have probably your best stretch with Chicago and Detroit, although apparently you're Chicago fan now. And then after that, you've got
They made the playoffs last year with nobody. I
yeah, sure,
mean,
that's true.
Mitchell Trubisky brought them to the playoffs,
Yeah,
and they almost beat the Saints.
sure. But yeah, then you've got the Chargers, divisional game, the Bengals, the Ravens, another divisional game. You've got Minnesota, another team that can just may not be the best, but they're going to try and kick your ass. Then you've got Tennessee, Kansas City, Cleveland, and Baltimore at the end to end the year.
That's four losses.
I mean that's rough, man.
That's four losses.
I think that definitely something I missed, on my part. And 6 to 7 wins is probably where I'm leaning now. But I certainly I hope to see the Steelers do well. And I think regardless, this kind of era of Mike Tomlin, Ben Roethlisberger will be remembered fondly. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger, not only under Mike Tomlin, but and you just have to shake it back to they just never could get over that hump of beating the Patriots. And it is sad that that trio of imagine if you were defending that trio, Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, and Antonio Brown in his prime, and in Le'Veon Bell's prime too. I mean,
how they didn't win a championship with those three, I don't know.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
At least Ben did get the championships for his record. But I don't want to spend too much more time on these guys. Let's jump over to the Cincinnati Bengals, who are projected to be the worst team in this division. I'd agree with that. Their current over/under for next season is going to be 6.5. I'm going to start and just say I'm taking under on this. I think this is maybe a 5-team win, a 5-win team. And it kind of goes top down. So first off, their quarterback coming back after a massive career-changing injury, potentially. I mean, again, replacing his leg. Zach Taylor, in my opinion, worst coach in the NFL. Offensive line, not good. I would say maybe the worst in the worst 5 tier of the NFL. And then your defense is awful as well. And then you're in this division, which is stacked. I mean, I'm not trying to keep heaping it on, but if you're following my pattern here, this is not a now type of team. This is a team that's got 2 more years worth of building and a new coach ultimately. How Zach Taylor even has a job, you just got to keep thinking Sean McVay, because that's the only reason. But honestly, I'm putting five wins. I'm not going to go lower than that, because I just don't think you got to be a really bad team like the Texans to get less than that from me. But this is going to be a rough season for these guys, and hopefully Joe Burrow stays healthy. That's all I care about.
Yeah, I don't have really any great debate points in this. I just want to be against you. I'm going to take the over, and I am going to bank on this team gets 1 or 2 upset wins, and then wins about 5 or 6 games. So hopefully we can look back on this at the end of the year and I am right and you are wrong. But they do have a tough schedule, and a big part of kind of not having as much faith in the Steelers and the Bengals winning as much games is once again just the fact that this division is absolutely loaded.
It's gonna be a tough one.
Yeah,
it's gonna be a tough one for the guys that just aren't ready yet.
And I mean, you look at the just the Bengals after their bye week in week 10, they have the Las Vegas Raiders. Once I get it, not the best team, but John Gruden's going to do everything to ruin your day. And you've got Pittsburgh, LA Chargers, the Niners, Denver might get a little break there, but once again, a team that's going to try and beat you. Then to end the year, you've got Baltimore, Kansas City, and Cleveland. A lot of good tests for young Joe Burrow. And like you said, I wish him not only a speedy recovery, but a full healthy season. But if anything, this is a season that is going to make Joe Burrow a better quarterback.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this though, right? So we talked a little bit about Joe Burrow's fantasy value, right? You look at that season opener, first 3 game stretch, right? He's got Minnesota, he's got Chicago, and Pittsburgh. That first 3-game stretch is going to be critical to his like starting because of him coming back from that injury. Current timeline, like week 1 is like when he's going to be available. So he's got to deal with some serious pass rush. And
Sure.
I think that could really set this season off to a bad start if he is under a ton of duress from the very beginning. But with that said, I think you got to consider, like, if you're a fantasy drafter, are you going to take a quarterback like Joe Burrow as high as he is if his first 3 weeks he's playing against those D lines who are probably going to beat him to hell?
Yeah.
That's a big stay away from me because you can't draft a guy that high and say for 3 weeks. I'm scared to start him.
Yeah, I'm not huge on Joe Burrow being ranked on average QB 13. And I think we both have a lot of faith in Joe Burrow as a player. And we could certainly be wrong. And, in that, first 9-week stretch, he has some opposable defenses as well. But I certainly think you're right. Those first 3 weeks, not only big in terms of, coming back from that injury, but also definitely really big in reestablishing that confidence that we saw last year. And, theoretically after that, week 4, he does get Jacksonville, probably a good team to rebound your confidence with Thursday night football. So kind of the spotlight as well. Definitely a night where he could come out and throw 6 touchdowns, right? That Jacksonville defense is not so great. But then next week, the following week, you're theoretically going up against Aaron Rodgers. Probably a week that might hurt your confidence, right? Seeing, one of the best in the league on the opposite side. And then he can hopefully rebuild that confidence the next week at Detroit. But, after that, you got Baltimore divisional game and then the New York Jets, another time where you can rebuild your confidence.
Yeah.
And really after that, you're going back to Cleveland and going through that stretch after the bye week that I already brought up. And like I said, I'm banking on this team getting 1 or 2 upset wins and then winning some of those more favorable matchups. But certainly not the top dog in this division. But like I said, in my opinion, this is a year where Joe Burrow can continue to develop and this offense can continue or start to really figure out who they are and figure out what they're going to do in the league as well.
Yeah, and I think jump into kind of the number 2. Well, I mean, they're tied. The Ravens and Browns are both tied at over and under 10. But I want to touch on the Ravens here. This is going to be a team here that I think is going to be opposite a lot of what they were last year. You saw the Ravens last year struggle in the beginning and heat up at the end, which coincided with Lamar Jackson heating up at the end. They're over under of 10.5. It's not a bad position, but I'm actually going to take the under on this. I think they get that 9 to 10 game winning, and a large part of that is because of after their bye week. Let's take a look at this schedule here from week 9 on. Minnesota. What are you thinking here? I think there's a chance they lose that game, but I'll give them the win, right? All right, so let's go 1-0. Then they play Miami. I think that's a toss-up, but I'm gonna give them a win on that one as well. Then they play Chicago. I think that's a win, so that's 3-0. But then they play Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Green Bay, Cincy, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh. I think they could easily lose 4 to 5 games at stretch. And I mean, those are against teams that are really good against Lamar Jackson because they can play amazing defense and they kind of limit what he can do. So I don't know if this is going to be a team where they're going to hit their stride at the end like they did last year, which allowed them to even win one playoff game. But then they also have to, they got to play juggernauts like Kansas City. They play Indianapolis earlier in the season too, who's going to be a really good unit. I believe they play Yeah, they do. They play the Chargers as well, who I think is going to come back really high as well next season. So all in all, that Ravens position of 10 and a half, I think it's pretty good, but it's going to be a hard 10 and a half. And it's not going to be a 10 and a half that gives them a momentum coming into the playoffs, which is going to be really unfortunate for Ravens fans because that was, I think, a big reason why they were able to beat Tennessee last year is because they had that momentum on their back. And something to look at when you're drafting Lamar Jackson, because in your championship rounds, you are going to be playing Los Angeles, Pittsburgh. I mean, those are rough games. Like,
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to take the under. I see them as a 9 to 10 win team. And, I see them getting a win week 1 against Las Vegas. I know I was kind of touting them in our last 2 teams, but I do think the Ravens are good enough to definitely beat Las Vegas. Week 2, Sunday Night Football, 8:20 p.m. versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I am going to give Kansas City that win, but that's going to be a great game. Then I do think they bounce back and demolish Detroit. And I was touting Denver earlier, but I definitely think they're good enough to beat Denver. But then I actually give them 2 losses in a row. Well, actually, I take that back. I give them a loss to Indianapolis. I think Indy has the right defense, the right defensive unit to kind of buckle that team down. And then I think it's kind of a toss up versus the LA Chargers. And that's kind of where I get that 9 to 10 potential at. Then I think they beat Cincinnati week 7, get their bye week. I'll give them the win versus Minnesota, but I actually give them the loss versus Miami. I'm a big believer in the Miami Dolphins this year, mainly because of their defense, and that's the main reason I give them the loss versus or at Miami, is because I think that defense can buckle them down. And then I do give them the win versus Chicago. But then, this is where it kind of gets interesting, that back half of the season, right? I'm going to give Cleveland both of those victories in week 12 and week 14. I'm going to give the Ravens the early victory week 13 against Pittsburgh. If Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback in Green Bay, I think that's a toss-up game. But then I do give them the victory at Cincinnati. Then those last 2 games, right? Barring any injuries, I give the LA Rams a win purely, once again, based off of their defense. And then I think that final game of the season versus the Pittsburgh Steelers is a toss-up. So at the end of the day, I agree with you. I see this as a 9 to 10 win game, and their most important, 9 to 10 winning season. And their most important games, as always, are easily these divisional games. They have got to come out and be able to beat the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers consistently, because I'm that confident in the Cleveland Browns that they're going to come out and make a statement this year and beat the Ravens twice to take the head of this division.
I am too. And I think when you look at this schedule as well, you can really kind of double down on that take right there. This is a very easy schedule.
Yeah, they have the easiest schedule, hands down, of any 4 of these teams.
This is crazy. I normally wouldn't want to do this, but I want to go through this week by week.
Sure.
And let's start with week 1, which is going to be what a hell of an opener. Honestly, Kansas City, Cleveland. This was a fantastic conference championship game. And so when I was doing this analysis of what I thought Cleveland come out as, I was trying to be conservative and say, Cleveland's going to lose this game. But I actually do think Cleveland's going to win this game.
Yeah, I'll paint the picture right now. Kansas City loses that Super Bowl game against Tampa Bay. Week 1, they've got the next touted Super Bowl contending team, and the Cleveland Browns come out and they win this football game, and Kansas City is in the spotlight and more of a negative, worrisome way, while the Cleveland Browns are kind of riding high into this first couple weeks where
I think they go 5-0.
Yeah, if you're asking me, yeah, I actually see them as well as a 5-0 team. But to start the year. But to backtrack, I think the biggest proponent to them beating Kansas City week one is their defense, and the fact that
Mhm.
we saw what that Tampa Bay front seven did to the Kansas City Chiefs, and the way they're able to put pressure on Mahomes and completely disrupt that offense. I think this Browns team can do the same. Obviously, a little bit different of a Kansas City team coming into this year,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
hey, I'm still going to take the Browns. I agree with you.
I think this is an improved Kansas City team, and I'm definitely excited to kind of do a deep dive on them because I think they actually had the best free agency period just by locking up that O line. But
Sure.
I think it is in the trenches where the Browns win this, but I would flip it. I think it's going to be the fact that I think the Browns come out and they run the ball 30 times against
Yeah.
these guys.
Yeah.
And that has been the historical pattern, barring the Tampa Bay Super Bowl, of how you beat these guys.
Yeah.
You beat them in the middle. You just run it straight down the gut. And I think Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt are both going to get 15 touches each. And I don't see Baker Mayfield being a player at all in this game. And it could be a situation where, maybe there's a couple big defensive plays on Cleveland's side, but I think it's really going to just come down to, I don't think Patrick Mahomes is going to have the ball in his hands enough to make a play.
Yeah.
But then after that game, Cleveland goes from potentially a win there to Houston. Okay, that's a win. Chicago, win. Minnesota, win. Tell me if you think I'm wrong, too. I'd love to hear some debates here.
Sure.
Chargers. I'm going to go win. I mean, they could lose that game, but
I'll take win too. Yeah.
Arizona, I've actually got as loss. I think Arizona, barring DeAndre Hopkins leaving because of COVID, I don't know if you saw that come out today that he said that he might, retire from the game over this COVID situation with the NFL telling players. But that's just another guy that's doing that. But keeping going down the list, I do think Arizona has a chance to beat him.
I'll put Arizona as a toss-up. Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree, but I'll let you keep going.
Denver, that's a win. Pittsburgh, that is I'm going to say with Pittsburgh, they split the series over the season.
Sure.
Just because I think Pittsburgh does have they have that kind of effect on teams, I think, in the division.
Sure.
So let's just say they win that one because it's at home. Then they go on to Cincinnati. They win that one. They play New England. I don't see how New England hangs with these boys, to be honest. That's another win. Then they play Detroit. That's a win. Then they play Baltimore.
Twice.
Again. Yeah, I think they split the series with this Baltimore team. This is going to be a hell of a back-to-back situation. But I think each home team wins. So this first game is against Baltimore at Baltimore. I think Baltimore takes that one home. Then they come back after the bye week, and they have the same Ravens team at the Cleveland Browns Stadium, and I think the Browns lock that up. But they also, after that, have the Vegas Raiders. I think they beat them for sure.
Sure.
Packers. Who do you take here? Because I think this is really the last remaining toss-up game.
The way I see this entire schedule, I think we actually kind of see it the same way. I've got, at worst, one loss to Baltimore and one loss to Pittsburgh, a loss to Green Bay, and a loss to Arizona at worst. So let's say the ceiling is 2 losses. The low is going to be 4 losses. And that's if we find out Aaron Rodgers is not the quarterback of Green Bay, then I take that off the table. If he's a quarterback at Denver, who they do play week 7, well, then maybe that doesn't really change things.
I think it does.
Yeah. But I think we both agree. Like I said, I think the ceiling is they have 2 losses. And I think the low is 4 losses, maybe 1 upset loss, right? Maybe one of these teams, maybe
every team's, yeah.
And maybe the next closest toss game is at the LA Chargers, but I do see them being able to overcome that week as well. But I think that's a good a team in the running for an upset loss as well would be the Chargers in week 5. But yeah, I think I agree with you 100% that if they're gonna lose a divisional game or two, it's gonna be to the Ravens or Pittsburgh. Especially that it's really interesting to see that that week 12 at Baltimore, the bye week, and then hosting Baltimore. That's going to be interesting, man. That's going to be some nitty gritty,
That's gonna be a
smack
lot
you
of
in the mouth
fighting, a
football. Oh
lot of
yeah,
fighting, especially
Garrett.
week 14. That's gonna be fighting.
Yeah, something will happen week 12. One of these two teams is not like. They'll have a whole week to speculate on it in the media, and then probably not a whole lot will happen week 14, but we'll probably speculate that it will, right? But yeah, I agree with you. And I think this team is absolutely freaking loaded. And I think they have a lot of firepower on both sides of the football. And yeah, I think it's interesting that we both chose Arizona as a loss. But I just think that
I just think it's because Arizona plays a very particular type of offense that can kind of negate how good your D line is because
sure,
they really spread you out. They try to move you laterally, and Kyler Murray can kind of make a good pass rush kind of fill a void because he can just run around you or run through you, similar like a Lamar Jackson does.
sure,
So I think what the Browns are really going to emphasize on defense isn't going to be super effective against the Cardinals. And then on the offensive side of the board, I mean, I think the Browns are still going to be able to, I think it's going to be a high scoring game. But if I'm taking it's a Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield toss up, I think Kyler's going to be able to make the play at the end of the game over
sure.
Baker.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think we're both easily taking the over here. I'm a little
Oh,
surprised that even, I guess this could change by week one, but I would have suspected to see them at least at like 11.5 in terms of where they're ranking on over unders. But
me
I'd
too. I'm
really just because
surprised
of this.
Vegas.
Yeah,
Surprised Vegas isn't on it. I think a lot of it is tied to the fact that it is the Cleveland Browns. I think everyone still doesn't want to give them what they deserve, which is this is a different team than the Browns that we grew
yeah,
up with. This is a really good freaking football team.
yeah.
And
And I think it's definitely mainly attributed to their head coach. Kevin
yeah,
Stefanski is, uh, he means business, man. I mean, and especially if they come out and set that narrative week one and they beat the Kansas City Chiefs, which we
that
both
could be huge.
express confidence in, that just kind of sets the tone. I mean, it's a long season, right? And it's only getting longer, right? I mean,
Yeah.
18 games,
Yeah.
right?
Seriously.
But if you can set that tone, right from week one, obviously huge implications for the confidence of this team, confidence of Baker Mayfield, and confidence of the defense, confidence of the offense all around, and the coaching staff. So I have a lot of faith in this team. I'm definitely taking the over, and you are as well. And but overall, just super excited. The AFC North, like I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, just kind of that when you think of football, you think of the rivalries between these teams. You think of these teams, the history behind them. And the teams that don't have as much history, the Browns and the Bengals, starting, to kind of make that history. And just
I think
exciting.
it's
Yeah.
no, yeah. I think this is a division that they have the kind of the past, the present, and the future all in one division. I mean, you got the Steelers who they're definitely still kind of hanging on to the past. You got the present and Lamar Jackson. Maybe the Browns, you can put them in there, but then you got the future and Joe Burrow, and kind of what this Bengals team can become.
Yep.
So I think this is an exciting division. A lot of storylines that are going to come out of next year, but I think the biggest takeaway that both you and I had coming out of this week was, wow, this Browns team is good, and wow, their schedule is opening up to be potentially the best record in the NFL next year.
Absolutely.
Definitely the AFC, and with fans back in the stands next year for the full season, I think we're also going to see that Browns stadium is going to be buzzing when the opposing teams come into the field. And so I'm
Absolutely.
looking forward to that because the Browns finally have something to look forward to. And a guy we didn't even touch on just before we close here tonight, they just added Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah.
Like Jadeveon Clowney is probably the best pass rusher at not actually getting sacks, but disrupting the entire play. I mean, that guy
Sure.
gets to the quarterback at such a high rate, is such an efficient pass rusher, but just doesn't get the sack.
Yeah.
But this guy, when he gets thrown into the system, I mean, this is
Yeah.
good. It's a perfect position for him.
You're
I
pairing
only
him.
wish, yeah, with Miles Garrett,
Yeah.
who in my opinion is the
And
best.
the
Defensive
addition
end.
of Tack McKinney. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a great addition as well.
yeah,
Yeah. I love Jadeveon Clowney as a player. There's always been rumors of him joining the Browns, and I'm glad it finally happened. I think it should have happened sooner. And I like their secondary too. And I just I like this team a lot. And we didn't even mention Malik Jackson, a D tackle
yeah,
either. I think what they have is they have a leader defensive end, a leader defensive tackle, a great veteran who is still very, very good in Jadeveon Clowney, some linebackers who no one wants to talk about who still show up and play, but then a leader at cornerback and a leader at safety. So what
yeah. Joe
else?
Johnson, what a hell of a pickup by them.
Yeah,
Best defensive acquisition
yeah.
of
Well, I
this
mean,
offseason.
what else can you ask for? I mean, you've got someone leading the pack at every angle. So a very, very scary defense as well. And definitely a unit that is going to come out and show up every Sunday, and kind of take that pressure off the offense as well. And I think this is a team that feels very complete on both sides of the football. So super stoked. I'm ready for some football, man. Like I
Yeah,
can't wait.
I'm ready to this.
Yeah,
I think we're sitting at under 50 days now
yeah.
before the regular season kicks off. So, not only looking forward to just any football, but I'm looking forward to that opening week, Kansas City, Cleveland Browns.
Absolutely.
That's for sure. I've got my calendar marked on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. Next week we've got the NFC North coming up. So
We'll spend about 2 hours on the Packers, Aaron Rodgers.
yeah, something we'll be monitoring every day. And it's definitely possible when we go to shoot, Aaron Rodgers will no longer be a Green Bay Packer,
Yeah.
and you might just be speculating. But hey, so definitely some interesting points coming up next week with the NFC North. So to go ahead and cap off tonight, we thank you very much for joining us, for watching, for listening. We had a blast. Obviously, a lot to cover this week. But hey, I think we both took just a lot of excitement, and we're both anticipating week 1 of the 2021 NFL football season. So with that, I will say farewell till next time, and I will let you end the night, Stephen.
Stay dangerous.
Yeah, hey, wake up dangerous. We thank you all very, very much. This was The Catch.